Beneath the surface of history, beyond the edge of every map we've drawn, lies a haunting question we've never been able to silence. What if some civilizations never truly vanished? What if they didn't fall, but withdrew, watching from the shadows, untouched by time? From crumbling ruins swallowed by jungle to ancient texts that speak of sky cities and underground realms, the evidence isn't conclusive, but it's persistent. Whispers in the archaeological record, gaps in our timelines, cultures that emerged too suddenly, technologies too advanced for their era, and disappearances too clean to be explained by war or weather alone. Could there be forgotten societies still hidden in remote corners of the earth, deep beneath the oceans, cloaked within uncharted mountains, or buried beneath centuries of shifting sand and silence? Civilizations that once shaped the world, and might still be shaping it now? The clues are out there, and so are the mysteries. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the most compelling, spine-tingling question of all. What if some ancient civilizations never really left us? In the southern deserts of Oman, where the wind carves ripples into endless dunes and the sun scorches the earth with an ancient intensity, there lies a region known as the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter. It is a vast, unforgiving expanse of sand, one of the most inhospitable places on earth. And yet, buried beneath its silence and dust, legend whispers of a lost city. A kingdom once called Iram of the Pillars. Others know it as Ubar, the Atlantis of the Sands. To the untrained eye, this might seem like just another story carried by the desert wind. But the Quran itself mentions Iram, a city of lofty pillars, the like of which was never built in the land. In Islamic tradition, it was a place of unimaginable wealth and arrogance, ruled by the people of Ad. When they turned away from righteousness, divine punishment is said to have struck, swallowing their civilization in a storm of sand, erasing their pride from the surface of the world. For centuries, that's all it remained, a parable, a myth, a tale told to caution against hubris. But in the 1990s, the line between myth and history began to blur. Using satellite imagery from NASA, researchers identified an ancient network of caravan routes, pathways etched into the land by the constant passage of traders moving frankincense, gold, and spices across the Arabian Peninsula. At a point where these trade routes converged, near a place called Shizr, archaeologists uncovered the ruins of a fortified settlement, stone walls, a collapsed limestone well, subterranean chambers. The evidence was real, tangible, and soon some began to believe they had found Ubar. The discovery made headlines. Could this be the fabled Iram of the Pillars? Had the city of legend truly been found beneath the desert's shifting skin? The ruins bore signs of sudden collapse, perhaps due to a sinkhole, perhaps something more. Was this the divine retribution spoken of in Scripture, reimagined through the lens of geology? Still, the questions linger. The archaeological site at Shizr dates back to the first millennium BC. It appears to have been a key stop along the incense trade, possibly even a regional capital. But the size of the ruins is modest, hardly the grand metropolis of myth. Where are the towering pillars, the sprawling palaces, the evidence of a mighty kingdom that rivaled the world's great cities? Is it possible that Ubar was not a single city, but a collective memory of multiple desert outposts, stitched together by travelers' tales, distorted over time into a single epic narrative? And if Ubar did fall, what caused its downfall? Some scholars point to environmental collapse, the drying of vital aquifers, the shifting of the dunes, a changing climate that rendered the region uninhabitable. Others speculate about internal strife, foreign invasions, or the slow death of trade. But these are only fragments, pieces of a puzzle with no clear border, no certainty. Then there are the stranger possibilities. Some local Bedouins speak of ruins farther out in the sands, half-buried structures that appear and vanish like mirages. There are tales of columns emerging from the earth after violent sandstorms, only to be reburied the next day. Stories of travelers who wandered into the desert and never returned. And though there is no proof of these accounts, the desert does not easily give up its secrets. Could there be more beneath the dunes than we realize? Could entire sectors of a forgotten kingdom lie untouched, waiting for the right moment or the right technology to be revealed? The Empty Quarter is still one of the least explored regions on the planet. What might still slumber beneath its shifting veil? There are even fringe theories, speculative, often dismissed by mainstream academia, yet persistent in their allure. Some suggest that Ubar may not have been entirely human in origin, that its rapid rise and sudden obliteration mirror ancient stories from across the globe. Cities of light wiped out in an instant. Others connect it with the broader phenomenon of lost desert civilizations, suggesting that a once thriving network of advanced cultures may have flourished in Arabia long before known history began to record their presence. Whether these ideas are fanciful or prophetic remains unknown. But in a world where ancient Göbekli Tepe lay buried for 12,000 years before discovery, and where new ruins continue to surface with each passing year, the line between possible and impossible grows thinner by the decade. So we return to the sands, to the silence, to the stories half told by wind and stone. Did Ubar ever truly exist? Or is it an echo, a symbol of all that has been forgotten in time's relentless tide? And if it did exist, could part of it still be out there, hidden just beyond our reach, preserved beneath 1,000 years of desert breath? Perhaps the sands are still watching. Perhaps the pillars are waiting to rise once more. As we leave behind the drifting sands of Arabia and the ghost of Ubar, our journey now leads us into an entirely different kind of silence. A silence not of dunes, but of leaves, dense, wet, and impenetrable. In the heart of Central America, wrapped in layers of cloud forest and tangled vines, lies another enigma whispered about for centuries. The locals call it La Ciudad Blanca, the White City. Others know it as the Lost City of the Monkey God. Here, in the uncharted depths of the Mosquitilla jungle of eastern Honduras, the rainforest breathes like a living wall, its thick canopy swallowing light, noise, and time. The terrain is treacherous, mountains of slick stone and choking vegetation, rivers swollen with rain, insects that have never known human fear. It is a place that repels exploration and guards its secrets with primal force. And yet, buried beneath this green labyrinth, many believe, lies a forgotten civilization, untouched, unseen, and perhaps not entirely lost. The first written mention of La Ciudad Blanca dates back to the early 16th century, when Spanish conquistadors heard rumors of a city gleaming with white stone deep in the jungle. A city said to be rich beyond imagination, adorned with idols of gold, and a people who vanished without a trace. But unlike the great ruins of the Maya or the Inca, no definitive evidence ever emerged. No standing temples, no deciphered script, no empire recorded in the annals of history. Just stories, passed from mouth to mouth, generation to generation, reinforced by the dense curtain of jungle that kept would-be explorers at bay. For centuries, these tales lived on as local legend, dismissed by many as folklore. But the forest has a memory, and it doesn't forget as easily as we might think. In 2012, a team of American and Honduran researchers used LIDAR, light detection and ranging technology, to scan the Mosquitia from the air. The results were astonishing. Hidden beneath the trees were clearly artificial structures, plazas, mounds, pyramidal shapes, and a complex network of roads, undeniably evidence of a pre-Columbian urban center. It was the first time science had caught a glimpse of what the locals had always believed. Something was there. In 2015, an expedition into one of the mapped sites confirmed it. Archaeologists uncovered an astonishing cache of stone sculptures, figures that appeared half human, half animal, ceremonial seats, and carvings unlike anything in known Mesoamerican cultures. The artifacts seemed hastily left behind, as if the inhabitants had fled suddenly. Who were these people, and why did they vanish? What's more intriguing is that the site was not part of any known empire. It bore no hallmarks of the Maya, Aztec, or Olmec. It was culturally distinct, suggesting the presence of a civilization that developed independently, possibly in isolation. Could this have been a hidden society that remained separate from its more famous neighbors? One that chose, or was forced, to disappear. Mainstream archaeology now considers this site to be part of an unknown but advanced society that flourished sometime between 1000 and 1400 AD. But many questions remain unanswered. The city, if it is the White City, is not entirely white. The structures, though impressive, are partially buried. The carvings, although elaborate, remain undeciphered. Could this have been just one of many cities? A single outpost in a broader kingdom, still cloaked in jungle? And then there are the older, stranger stories. Indigenous tribes in the region have long spoken of a cursed city, where those who enter do not return. Explorers throughout the 20th century claimed to have seen flashes of white stone through the trees, only to be driven back by disease, terrain, or inexplicable misfortune. There were rumors of temples guarded by monkeys, of shrines deep in caverns, of artifacts found and then lost. Some say the city moves. Others claim it reveals itself only when it chooses to. Could this be merely myth layered onto mystery? Or is the jungle itself concealing something more? After all, the Muisca remains one of the least mapped places on Earth. Even with modern tools, the terrain is so hostile that many regions have never been set foot on by archaeologists. What might still lie beyond the reach of satellites and LiDAR scans? There are even fringe suggestions that the city was not simply abandoned, but deliberately hidden. That its people, perhaps fearing conquest or spiritual doom, vanished into the earth or into the jungle itself, leaving behind no bodies, no bones, just their warnings carved in stone. Some theorists connect the city to global flood myths, to stories of civilizations that retreated underground or into alternate planes when the world above changed. Others draw parallels to Amazonian legends of cities of gold and sacred places guarded by spirits of the forest. Yet despite the speculation, the jungle remains indifferent. It offers no answers, only clues. Stone shapes beneath roots, broken statues cradled by moss, paved causeways swallowed by earth. So we ask again, what was La Ciudad Blanca? Was it the heart of a lost kingdom, or merely its outskirts? Were the people who lived there part of a broader civilization still sleeping beneath the vines, their secrets intact, their descendants perhaps living in plain sight under new names, with old memories sealed in ritual? The forest is patient, and perhaps so is the truth. As we drift north from the humid jungles of Honduras and the legends of La Ciudad Blanca, the landscape shifts once again, this time into something colder, sharper, and just as enigmatic. Here, in the vast forested reaches of what is now Quebec, Canada, lies a mystery almost entirely forgotten by modern history. A kingdom that exists only in the fading words of explorers and the whispered lore of native peoples. It is called the Kingdom of Saguenay, a land of wealth, beauty, and secrets that may never have been meant for outsiders to know. The region is rugged, defined by icy rivers, glacial valleys, and dense boreal forest that stretches for hundreds of miles in every direction. The land feels ancient, untouched by time, still ruled by the rhythms of wind and water. And somewhere in this wild, primeval landscape, so the stories go, lies the trace of a lost civilization. The tale begins in 1535. The French explorer Jacques Cartier, sailing under the banner of King Francis I, was navigating the St. Lawrence River when he encountered the Iroquoian people at Stadacona, near present-day Quebec City. There, he met their chief, Donnacona, who told him of a place far to the north, a land called Saguenay. Unlike the modest wooden settlements Cartier had seen, Saguenay was described as something else entirely. A kingdom of immense riches, a place where people wore garments of silk, gold hung from their necks, and houses were made not of bark but of shining stone. To European ears, the description echoed the dreams of El Dorado or Ophir, those distant, shimmering realms where kings walked barefoot on gold. Cartier was intrigued. He pressed for more. Donnacona insisted the place was real, that he had spoken with men who had seen it. Cartier recorded these conversations in his journals, which survive to this day. But Saguenay was never found. Cartier would return to France with Donnacona in tow, perhaps as proof, perhaps as leverage. The chief died in Europe, far from the land he knew, and the secret of Saguenay died with him. Cartier mounted later expeditions to search for the fabled kingdom, but each ended in disappointment. Harsh weather, disease, and miscommunication thwarted every attempt. The French crown eventually abandoned the quest, dismissing Saguenay as legend or misunderstanding. And yet, the idea persisted. Centuries later, the name Saguenay remains etched into the geography of Quebec, rivers, towns, and fjords that carry the word like an echo. And the region itself, remote and lightly explored until recent decades, still holds an air of mystery. Geological surveys have uncovered significant mineral wealth in the surrounding area: iron, copper, even traces of gold. Could the stories Donnacona told have been rooted in fact, exaggerated through generations, but based on real observations of a rich northern land? Or could it have been something more? Some historians suggest that Saguenay might have referred to a real indigenous society unknown to Europeans at the time, perhaps a trading confederacy that extended beyond the St. Lawrence Valley into the interior of Canada. Others propose that the Iroquois may have described not a single city, but a network of settlements, connected by trade, ritual, and myth. But no direct archaeological evidence has ever been tied to such a civilization. Then there are the stranger theories. Certain fringe researchers have speculated that Saguenay was not a kingdom of this era at all, but a memory of an older time, a remnant of a pre-Columbian, even pre-glacial civilization passed down in oral tradition and misinterpreted as contemporary. According to this view, the stories Cartier heard may have been echoes of a vanished people who left behind no ruins, no inscriptions, but perhaps something deeper, a memory engraved in myth. There are even claims, though difficult to verify, that 19th century fur traders, Jesuit missionaries, and early settlers heard variations of the same legend from indigenous elders. Tales of a white city to the north, a land where people disappeared into the mountains and returned changed, or not at all. Whispers of structures hidden in valleys, swallowed by the earth and time. Skeptics argue that Saguenay was a fabrication, told to Cartier to distract or amuse, or to lure him away from tribal lands. But if so, why such specific detail? Why such insistence on wealth, silk, gold, stone? And why did the idea recur again and again, even after the first wave of exploration had ended? The land around the Saguenay River remains a place of stark beauty and quiet secrecy. Towering cliffs plunge into icy waters. Pines sway over forgotten trails. And deeper still, beneath layers of ice, soil, and unspoken memory, might there be something waiting? Not necessarily a city of gold, but the bones of a culture lost before its name could be written. Is it possible that something remains out there, hidden in the folds of wilderness, protected by the very remoteness that kept so many away? Or was the Kingdom of Saguenay never a place at all, but a message, meant only for those who would listen? As with so many ancient tales, the answers lie somewhere between geography and imagination. And the forest, it seems, isn't done speaking. As we journey further along the shadowed edges of forgotten history, we now cross the Atlantic to the rugged coastlines of Cornwall, England, where the land ends in jagged cliffs and the sea rolls in with ancient rhythm. Here, just beyond the windswept tip of the Cornish peninsula, another legend takes shape. A kingdom said to have thrived in full view of the mainland, before the ocean swallowed it whole. They called it Lyonesse. To stand at Land's End or on the weathered cliffs of Penzance and look out toward the Isles of Scilly is to face the same waters that, according to local lore, once flowed through the streets of a thriving kingdom. A land of green fields, 140 churches, golden towers rising above the waves. A kingdom lost not to time or war, but to water, in a single cataclysmic night. The tale of Lyonesse appears throughout British folklore and Arthurian legend. In some versions, it was the home of Tristan, one of King Arthur's most trusted knights. In others, it is a land of noble houses, doomed by hubris or cursed by fate. But always, the story ends the same way. The earth trembled, the sea surged, and the kingdom was lost beneath the waves. Survivors, if any, were few. Some say only one man escaped on horseback, riding ahead of the rising tide. It would be easy to dismiss Lyonesse as pure myth, another romantic tragedy carved into the cultural memory of medieval Europe. And yet, the story lingers in an oddly persistent way. Locals in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly have spoken for generations of stone walls visible beneath the water during low tide. Fishermen have claimed to hear the faint sound of bells tolling beneath the sea. Some divers have even reported glimpses of submerged structures, rectangular shapes, upright stones, patterns in the sea floor that do not appear entirely natural. Is it merely the mind seeking shapes where none exist? Or could these be the last remnants of something that once stood on dry land? Modern geology adds another layer of intrigue. During the last ice age, sea levels were dramatically lower. Much of what is now the Celtic Sea would have been dry land, fertile plains stretching between Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. As the glaciers melted and the oceans rose, this land would have gradually disappeared beneath the waterline. It's not speculation, it's science. Paleogeographic reconstructions show that these areas were indeed inhabited by Mesolithic peoples. Evidence of settlements, tools, and burial sites has been recovered not far from this submerged shelf. Could Lyonesse have been a memory of this lost landscape? Passed down through oral tradition, embellished through the centuries, transformed into a story of kingdoms and kings? Perhaps. But certain details remain unexplained. For one, the precision of the legends. Ancient Cornish maps often show a landmass west of Cornwall that no longer exists. The poet Thomas Malory, writing in the 15th century, refers to Lyonesse as a real place, not allegory. And even earlier, in the chronicles of Geoffrey of Monmouth, there are mentions of western lands lost to the sea. It is rare for so many sources, separated by time and geography, to converge so clearly on a single idea. Then there are the stories from the Isles of Scilly themselves. Inhabitants there have long maintained that their islands were once connected in a single landmass, larger, greener, and more populated. Some archaeological surveys suggest that settlements once stretched across now submerged regions. Fields and hedgerows, seen from the air or traced by sonar, hint at organized agricultural systems beneath the waves. These aren't just the products of imagination, they are patterns that provoke questions. Could a Bronze Age or even Iron Age civilization have existed in this region, developed beyond our current understanding, and then been gradually and violently lost to the encroaching sea? There is no written record of such a people, no names, no artifacts conclusively tied to a Kingdom of Lyonesse. But the Atlantic has never been kind to preservation. Storms, currents, and centuries of sediment bury more than just sand. They erase. They conceal. And still, the sea speaks. In moments of perfect calm, when the tide recedes far beyond its usual reach, some say they've seen the tops of stone buildings, half buried in kelp and shadow. Others, walking the sands of Mounts Bay or the beaches near Marazion, have claimed to find stone-paved walkways or the traces of ancient roads that vanish into the water. There is no consensus, only accounts, consistent, lingering, quietly unresolved. Could Lyonesse have been a name given not to a single city, but to a lost network of coastal communities? Could the story of a sudden deluge be a cultural memory of slow-moving catastrophe, collapsed into a single night in the minds of those who lived through its aftermath? Or is it possible that a real kingdom, unknown to official history, once ruled these now drowned lands, leaving behind only whispers and the ghost of a bell beneath the tide? We may never know for certain. But as the Atlantic churns and the wind presses against the Cornish cliffs, the question remains, haunting, unresolved, and waiting. What lies beneath the waves, and who remembers what was lost? And as the mists of Lyonesse settle back into the sea, we turn now toward a land where myth and landscape are so tightly woven, it becomes almost impossible to pull them apart. We arrive at the western edge of Europe, windswept, rain-drenched, and deeply ancient. This is Ireland, a place of rolling green hills, jagged coastlines, and stones older than time itself. And in the deep roots of its oldest legends lies a civilization unlike any other, a people known not just for their mystery, but for their terror. They are called the Fomorians. To hear the word spoken in Gaelic myth is to summon images both strange and powerful. Described as giants, sea raiders, deformed spirits of chaos, or perhaps something else entirely, the Fomorians appear in the earliest Irish texts, predating even the famed Tuatha Dé Danann. According to the Labor Gabala Érenn, the Book of Invasions, the Fomorians were among the original inhabitants of Ireland, rising from the sea or the dark places of the earth long before the arrival of humankind. They were rulers, tyrants, and sometimes gods. And then, one day, they were gone. But were they ever really here to begin with? The legends say the Fomorians lived in the sea or on remote islands far beyond the western horizon. Some accounts place their strongholds beneath the waves, others in hidden mountain fortresses. They were not simply another tribe. They were a presence, a force of nature, both feared and revered. Their leader, Balor of the Evil Eye, could kill with a single glance. And yet, even as they waged war and shaped the early world of Celtic myth, their true origin was always unclear. Were they invaders from another land, or were they the land's first guardians, twisted by time and memory into something darker? Unlike many mythic peoples, the Fomorians are difficult to pin down. They are not easily categorized as spirits, nor mortals, nor gods. Some scholars have suggested they represent the raw, untamed forces of nature, chaos, storm, sea, and death, embodied in humanoid form. Others see them as a distorted memory of a real pre-Celtic people. perhaps a forgotten seafaring culture, once powerful in the British Isles, whose memory was preserved only through distorted echoes in myth. And then there is the geography. Ireland is a land full of megalithic structures, dolmens, passage tombs, and stone circles whose purposes remain elusive. Sites like Newgrange and Carrowmore predate the pyramids of Egypt, and yet we know so little about those who built them. Could these mysterious monuments be remnants of a civilization that once thrived here, later demonized or mythologized as the Fomorians? Or were the Fomorians never meant to be remembered as entirely human? Some stories describe them as one-eyed, or having limbs of different sizes, or skin like bark or stone. They were said to arrive in dark ships, shrouded in mist. Certain later interpretations linked them to pirates or Norse invaders, but the stories are far older than the Viking Age, and throughout it all, a single theme persists. The Fomorians come from the sea, they vanish into the sea, and they may yet return from the sea. In modern times, archaeologists have uncovered traces of maritime cultures along the Atlantic coast of Europe dating back thousands of years, far earlier than once believed. Could the Fomorians be a cultural memory of seaborne people who arrived on Irish shores millennia before the Celts, trading, raiding, or settling briefly before disappearing? It's not impossible. Even stranger theories suggest the Fomorians were not just ancient humans or spirits, but something entirely different. Some fringe researchers propose they were survivors of a forgotten Atlantic civilization, perhaps linked to broader flood myths from around the world. Others speculate about pre-Ice Age maritime societies, whose knowledge was lost with rising seas, leaving behind only faint traces in story and stone. Of course, these ideas remain unproven. The Fomorians exist primarily in myth, but the consistency of their imagery across centuries, the recurring association with sea and storm, and the unexplained silence surrounding their origin invite more questions than answers. Why did the Irish remember the Fomorians with such clarity, yet never record where they came from or where they went? Why do so many ancient cultures speak of seaborne peoples with great power and strange appearance? And why, even now, do parts of the Irish coast still feel somehow haunted by wind, by stone, and by something deeper? Perhaps the Fomorians were never just a people, but a symbol of what came before memory, before record, before history. Or perhaps, in some form, they're still out there, beneath the waves, beyond the mist, waiting. And as the sea mists around the Fomorians drift back into legend, we now turn inland, deep into the vast, sun-baked heart of the North American continent. Here, in the arid landscapes of the American Southwest and the open plains stretching toward Kansas, another mystery waits. One not born of ocean storms or ancient tombs, but of golden cities shimmering on distant horizons. Cities that may never have existed, or may have existed all too briefly, only to vanish without a trace. They are known as Quivira and Cíbola, the fabled cities of gold. The story begins in the 16th century, during Spain's relentless push into the New World. Conquistadors, having tasted the riches of the Aztec Empire, believed there was more to be found. Vast empires of wealth lying just beyond the edges of the known. And in the dry, unforgiving stretches of what is now New Mexico and the Great Plains, rumors began to circulate. Native tribes spoke of cities to the north, places of shining stone, where houses were built of precious metals and streets gleamed in the sun. 7 cities, it was said, together called Cíbola. One man in particular became obsessed with these tales, Francisco Vázquez de Coronado. In 1540, he led a massive expedition north from Mexico, determined to find these golden realms. Along the way, he encountered pueblos, real, thriving communities, but none matched the scale or splendor of what he sought. Still, the stories persisted. And so, Coronado pushed further, deeper into the unknown. Eventually, he was led east by a mysterious guide known as El Turco, who spoke of a kingdom even more magnificent than Cíbola, a place called Quivira, far across the plains. So Coronado followed, enduring hunger, hardship, and hundreds of miles of empty terrain. When he finally reached Quivira, in what is now believed to be Kansas, he found nothing. Not cities of gold, but a modest settlement of grass huts. Simple people. No treasure, no empire. He had been deceived. He had. At least, that's the official account. But the story doesn't end there. For centuries, the names Quivira and Cíbola have lingered in the American imagination, marked on early maps, whispered in frontier legends, and woven into the mythos of a continent still half unexplored. Some historians argue that the entire saga was a tragic misunderstanding, indigenous peoples describing real cities, like the pueblos of the Zuni or Hopi, which were later exaggerated by Spanish ambition into cities of gold. Others suggest the deception was deliberate, designed to send the conquistadors wandering into the wilderness, far from native lands. Yet something about the mystery refuses to settle. Satellite surveys and archaeological excavations across the Southwest continue to reveal the ruins of long-abandoned cities, some well-known, like Chaco Canyon or Mesa Verde, others still barely understood. Massive roads, ceremonial structures, and irrigation systems point to a complex network of ancient societies far more interconnected and sophisticated than once thought. Could the stories of Cíbola and Quivira have been memories of real civilizations, already in decline or transformation when the Spanish arrived? Or, more provocatively, could there have been cities that were mobile, seasonal, or constructed of materials long since reclaimed by the earth? Cities that moved with the rhythm of climate, war, or trade? A kingdom that rose in the high deserts or along river valleys, flourishing for a time before dissolving, leaving behind only oral traditions, scattered artifacts, and the echo of gold in the distance. Even the notion of gold itself is worth questioning. To the European mind, gold meant power, permanence, empire. But in many Native American cultures, gold held little material value. What if the golden cities described to Coronado were never meant to be taken literally? What if they were spiritual centers or sacred places, glowing in myth, not in metal? Could it be that the treasure was never in wealth, but in knowledge, ritual, or hidden history? There are modern accounts, too, stories from ranchers, hikers, and amateur explorers who claim to have stumbled upon strange ruins in remote canyons, or seen shimmering objects just beneath the surface of dry lake beds. While many such claims have been dismissed or remain unverified, they speak to a lingering sense that something is still out there, something just beyond reach. And of course, there are the fringe theories. Some suggest that Quivira and Cíbola were not indigenous at all, but remnants of old-world explorers who arrived long before Columbus. Phoenicians, perhaps, or Chinese fleets blown off course. Others connect the mystery to lost Atlantean outposts or pre-Ice Age civilizations whose records were wiped away in global cataclysm. These ideas remain far outside accepted scholarship, but the absence of answers continues to give them oxygen. Ultimately, the trail of Quivira and Cíbola fades as it began, in dust, wind, and open sky. The names still mark rivers, counties, and ghost towns, as if the land itself remembers something we no longer understand. Were these cities ever real? Or are they the embodiment of a deeper truth? Civilizations that emerged, thrived, and disappeared before history could capture them? In the shifting sands and whispering plains of the American interior, the silence is vast. But listen closely, and you might still hear the faint echoes of footsteps, searching for gold that was never just gold. As the dust of Quivira and Cíbola fades into the winds of the Great Plains, we shift now to an island of dense forests, ancient temples, and tangled myth. A place where civilization has risen and fallen in layers, and where something far stranger may have once walked among us. We arrive in Sri Lanka, tropical, verdant, and teeming with life. But in the hidden corners of its jungles, long before the modern world reached its shores, legends whispered of a different kind of people. They were called the Nittaewo. To the Sinhalese and Vedda people, two of Sri Lanka's oldest known ethnic groups, the Nittaewo were not just creatures of folklore, but remembered beings. Small in stature, covered in reddish hair, and walking upright like humans. They were described as agile, nocturnal, and fiercely territorial. Some say they used simple tools, hunted small game, and lived in caves. Others recall more chilling details, that they did not speak, that they fought with claws, and that their existence ended in violence and fear. But who, or what, were they? The earliest accounts come not from modern anthropology, but from oral history. In the eastern regions of Sri Lanka, especially near the harsh and remote jungles of Mahaoya and the Donegala Plateau, elders tell of the last days of the Nittaewo. According to Vedda tradition, the Nittaewo were exterminated roughly 2 centuries ago. The story goes that after years of increasing conflict with nearby tribes, the Vedas finally cornered the last of the Nittaewo, believed to be around 20 individuals, into a narrow rock cleft. They then sealed the entrance with boulders, leaving them to die within. It is a disturbing account, but is it merely a cautionary tale, or a record of a real event? In the late 19th century, British colonial officials and explorers began collecting stories about the Nittaewo. The most notable among them was Hugh Neville, a civil servant and ethnologist who spent years studying Sri Lanka's indigenous cultures. He took the reports seriously, recording descriptions that were consistent across different regions. Humanoid figures, around 4 feet tall, with short limbs, long arms, no discernible language, and an aversion to fire. Other officials, including British Judge Frederick Lewis, published essays in scientific journals outlining what seemed to be credible testimony from locals who claimed their grandparents had seen the Nittaewo with their own eyes. Skeptics have long dismissed these reports as folklore, perhaps a misremembered encounter with wild animals, or confusion between the Nittaewo and primitive tribes living in isolation. But others have pointed out the consistency in physical description and behavior. This was not a story passed down with exaggeration and flourish. It was told plainly, with unnerving clarity. Could the Nittaewo have been a surviving offshoot of an archaic human lineage? Some researchers have speculated that the Nittaewo might have been a relic population of Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbits of Indonesia, whose fossil remains were discovered on the island of Flores in 2003. These ancient humans stood about 3 to 4 feet tall, had small brains, and may have lived as recently as 12,000 years ago. The similarities are striking, and though Sri Lanka and Flores are separated by a considerable stretch of ocean, ancient maritime dispersals across Southeast Asia are no longer considered implausible. Could a cousin species of Homo sapiens have clung to existence in the forests of Sri Lanka into the 18th or even 19th century, unknown to the world, known only to those who lived beside them? There is another, more unsettling possibility. What if the Nittaewo weren't entirely human at all? Some Vedda legends describe them as more beast than man, unable to speak, covered in thick fur, and attacking prey with animalistic savagery. They were said to sleep in trees, leap across ravines, and vanish into thickets faster than any hunter could track. Could these traits point to an undiscovered primate? A bipedal hominid native to the island, now extinct or possibly still hidden in the deeper reaches of jungle no satellite has yet pierced? Despite the modern age, large portions of Sri Lanka's interior remain largely unexplored. The forests of the east are particularly rugged, riddled with limestone caves, steep ravines, and dense canopy. Even with advanced technology, the search for evidence is hampered by terrain, politics, and limited funding. Some amateur expeditions have returned with strange findings: claw marks on tree trunks, unidentifiable hair samples, and footprints unlike any known primate. None of it is conclusive, but none of it has been fully explained either. Mainstream science remains skeptical. Without skeletal remains, photographic evidence, or clear DNA samples, the Nittaewo remain beyond the boundary of accepted history. But in the quiet corners of Sri Lanka, where the air is thick with the sound of insects and the forest hums with unseen movement, the idea is not so easily dismissed. What if they are still out there? Not as ghosts, but as survivors, hiding in places we've yet to reach, or perhaps in the memories of those who were the last to see them. The line between legend and history is not always easy to draw, especially when the forest keeps its secrets so well. And from the shadowy forests of Sri Lanka, where the last whispers of the Nittaewo fade into rustling leaves, we now travel across the globe to the misty highlands of South America. Here, on the savannas and ridges of Colombia's eastern Andes, cloaked in a veil of fog and mystery, lies the land once ruled by the Muisca Confederation. A civilization remembered today more for a myth than for its reality, and yet, beneath that myth, something still shimmers faintly. Perhaps not just gold, but something deeper, still waiting to be uncovered. The high plateau of Cundinamarca and Boyaca, known as the Altiplano Cundiboyacense, is where the Muisca people once flourished. It is a land shaped by extremes, sharp cliffs, still lagoons, and a quiet that feels ancient. The air is thin here, crisp and cool, as if the mountains themselves are holding their breath. And it is here that one of the most enduring legends of the Americas was born, the story of El Dorado. But El Dorado was never meant to be a place. Not at first. In the early 1500s, Spanish chroniclers began to report strange stories from the interior of the New World. Not of cities paved in gold, as later legends would claim, but of a man, a ruler, a priest-king of the Muisca, who covered himself in gold dust and, aboard a raft, offered treasures to the sacred waters of Lake Guatavita. He would plunge beneath the surface as an offering to the gods, disappearing for a time, then returning purified. This ritual was real. Spanish explorers witnessed the remnants. They recovered artifacts, gold trinkets, ceremonial figures, intricately shaped ornaments. One of the most iconic, the Muisca raft, now housed in Bogotá's Gold Museum, depicts the very ceremony in fine detail. A raft of cast gold, carrying a central figure surrounded by attendants, a memory cast in metal. But the Spanish, driven by greed and imagination, reinterpreted the ritual as a pointer to something larger, an entire city of gold, hidden in the jungle. They searched. They drained parts of Lake Guatavita. They explored deep into the Amazon, convinced that the Muisca were merely the gatekeepers of a much greater empire to the east. And yet, they never found it. Why? The Muisca Confederation was not a single empire, but a complex network of communities, organized, advanced, and spiritually rich. They excelled in salt mining, agriculture, and metallurgy, producing some of the finest gold work in pre-Columbian South America. But their power was not defined by conquest. Instead, it came from balance, with nature, with their gods, and with each other. Still, when the Spanish arrived, something strange happened. Unlike the Inca or the Aztec, whose capital cities could be located and seized, the Muisca seemed to dissolve. Their settlements, while sizable, were often temporary or decentralized. Their most sacred sites, caves, lagoons, and mountain peaks, were difficult to access, shrouded in fog and guarded by geography itself. Some believe this dispersal was intentional, that the Muisca knew how to disappear. Could elements of their confederation have survived? Hidden away in the highlands, protected by terrain and secrecy? Even today, remote Andean villages preserve Muisca words, traditions, and practices. Some rituals echo the gold offerings once given to lakes like Guatavita, Iguaque, and Tota. The descendants of the Muisca are still here, quietly living in the margins of modern Colombia. But the full scope of their ancient knowledge, their cosmology, and their buried treasures remains elusive. And that raises a larger question. Was El Dorado ever about wealth at all? Or was it about access? Access to a different kind of knowledge, a different way of seeing the world? Some researchers suggest the Spanish mistook spiritual opulence for material wealth, that the Muisca's greatest treasures weren't stored in palaces, but in sacred places, encoded in ritual and landscape. There are also persistent rumors of unmapped structures deep in the highland forests, stone formations that don't align with modern settlements. Accounts from early explorers speak of sunken paths, stepped terraces, and dry canals suggesting ancient hydraulic systems. Others point to stories of sacred cities located beyond the known reaches of the Confederation, preserved in myth as places only the initiated could reach. And then, of course, there are the lakes. Despite numerous attempts, the full depths of Lake Guatavita have never been thoroughly explored. Its circular shape, thought to be formed by a meteorite impact, adds a cosmic touch to the story. Over the centuries, divers and dredging teams have recovered artifacts, but most agree that much remains buried beneath layers of sediment or hidden in underwater caves no modern instruments have yet mapped. Could the Muisca have left behind more than we realize? Not in gold or jewels, but in encoded symbols, alignments, and sacred geography. Could there be, somewhere in the Colombian highlands, a place where the ritual of El Dorado was not merely performed, but safeguarded? A city or sanctuary not lost, but veiled, protected by the very mountains that gave it birth? The winds here still whisper in the language of the ancients, and if you stand at the edge of Lake Guatavita at dawn, when the mist rises and the sky reflects off still waters, you may feel it too, that the story is not yet over, that the Muisca are not merely a legend left behind, but a civilization that may still be watching, hidden in the folds of cloud and stone. As the fog lifts from Lake Guatavita and the echoes of the Muisca still whisper through the Andean winds, we drift northwest into the fertile valleys and rugged coasts of western Mexico. Here, where rivers weave through jungle and volcanic slopes fall away to the Pacific, traces remain of a civilization once described as both a cultural bridge and a phantom kingdom. A people remembered not for how they ended, but for the way they seemed to have faded. This is the enigma of the Aztatlán culture. The lands they occupied, stretching across modern-day Nayarit, Sinaloa, Jalisco, and parts of Durango, are a tapestry of riverbanks, mangroves, and highlands. Aztatlán settlements rose along waterways like the Rio Santiago and Rio San Pedro, often surrounded by dense vegetation and shifting terrain. The environment is humid, heavy with the scent of earth and rain, and filled with the sounds of life. Yet it guards its secrets well. Time and forest have worked together to erase what once stood here in permanence. Archaeologists classify Aztatlán not as a centralized empire, but as a tradition, a network of interconnected city-states and communities that shared language, customs, and trade from around 900 to 1350 AD. They are known for their vibrant ceramics, their turquoise inlaid ornaments, and their role in one of the largest trade systems of pre-Columbian North America. Goods from as far as the American Southwest and central Mexico moved through Aztatlán hands: obsidian, cacao, marine shells, feathers, copper, jade. This was not an isolated people. It was a civilization in motion. And yet, so much about them remains unclear. The word Aztatlán itself bears a peculiar resonance. In Nahuatl, it means place of herons, but it is also hauntingly familiar for another reason. According to Aztec origin myths, Aztlán, spelled nearly identically, was the mysterious homeland from which the Mexica, or Aztecs, once migrated before founding Tenochtitlan, a land of white reeds, lakes, and temples, a land that has never been found. Is this coincidence of names merely linguistic drift, or is it a clue? Could the Aztatlán culture have been the last echo of that mythical homeland, forgotten by time, preserved only in scattered ceramics and oral tradition? We know that the Aztecs believed Aztlán lay to the northwest, and we know that the Aztatlán region falls squarely within that direction. The geographic overlap is tantalizing, even more so when we consider that the cultural traits of the Aztatlán people, ceremonial ball courts, tiered platforms, specific burial practices, bear a resemblance to those seen in both northern and central Mesoamerican civilizations. They seem to occupy a liminal space, neither entirely northern nor southern, a cultural crossroads. And then, around the 14th century, the Aztatlán tradition disappears. Archaeological layers grow silent, settlements are abandoned, pottery styles vanish, trade slows, and no written record survives to tell us why. Was it war, drought, disease? Or did the Aztatlán people simply move, blending into other populations, migrating inland or southward, becoming part of the Aztec Empire that was just beginning to rise? Some scholars suggest that the Aztatlán were absorbed into the larger Nahua-speaking populations that came to dominate central Mexico. Others believe they fragmented into smaller, less centralized groups. But none of these theories can fully explain the suddenness of their disappearance, or the lingering presence of their influence, because something remains. In certain towns along the rivers of Nayarit, oral histories still speak of ancestral cities now swallowed by jungle. In ceremonial centers like Chacalila and Ixtlan del Rio, unexplained structures hint at knowledge lost. Petroglyphs appear on remote rock faces, symbols whose meanings are still debated. Some of the glyphs match those seen hundreds of kilometers away. Were these part of a sacred writing system, or signs left for those who knew how to read the land? And then there is the speculative, those who believe the Aztatlán culture may not have vanished entirely, but retreated into hidden valleys, into caves, into other names and identities. There are local legends of people who left not because they were defeated, but because they chose to disappear. Some connect them to the Chichimeca, others to wandering priestly castes said to have traveled with knowledge from a time before cities. A few fringe theories even link Aztatlán to the broader idea of lost mother cultures, those hypothetical ancient civilizations from which the known Mesoamerican empires may have descended. The name Aztatlán in these interpretations is not just a region but a key, a linguistic artifact pointing back to a primordial homeland we've yet to find, one that may lie beneath floodplains, beneath volcanic ash, or beneath our assumptions. The truth, as always, remains elusive. What we do know is that the Aztatlán culture connected north and south, past and future. That they stood at the edge of myth and memory, and that they left behind a trail not of ruins or monuments, but of faint impressions spread wide across a landscape still reluctant to give up its past. So we are left with a question, not only about who the Aztatlán were, but about where they might have gone. Were they the stewards of a forgotten migration, a culture that chose to vanish rather than be conquered? Or are they still there, in name, in blood, in ritual, waiting, quietly, for us to see them not as a mystery, but as a message from a time just beyond our grasp? The rivers still flow. The herons still gather. And somewhere in the space between myth and map, Aztatlán may still exist. As the echoes of Aztatlán drift westward, beyond the rivers of Mesoamerica and into the expanse of open sea, our journey brings us now to the windswept shores of the Mediterranean. Here, where turquoise waves break against ancient stone, lies the island of Sardinia, rugged, mountainous, and steeped in secrets. Its interior is wild and untamed. Its coastlines are lined with silent megaliths, and woven into its soil is the fading legacy of a people long shrouded in mystery. They are called the Shardana, one of the most elusive and enigmatic civilizations of the ancient world. To the trained eye, their presence lingers in carved stone towers known as nurag, scattered across Sardinia like a constellation in stone. Some are solitary. Others form clusters, surrounded by the faint outlines of vanished villages. Built from massive basalt blocks, these megalithic structures date back to at least the 2nd millennium BC, and yet no written record explains their builders. No official history speaks their name, and still, the towers stand. The Shardana first appear in Egyptian records, not as allies or traders, but as warriors. In the 14th and 13th centuries BC, during the reigns of pharaohs like Ramesses II and Merneptah, inscriptions and reliefs depict them as part of the feared Sea Peoples, a confederation of maritime raiders who descended upon the eastern Mediterranean in waves of destruction. They wore horned helmets, carried round shields, and fought with discipline and ferocity. According to Egyptian texts, they were both enemy and mercenary, fighting against Egypt and later fighting for it. But where had they come from? Scholars have long debated the origin of the Shardana. Their name hints at Sardinia. Their weapons and attire resemble Bronze Age artifacts unearthed on the island. Their cultural traces, nurag, bronze figurines, fortified settlements, point to a society both militarized and organized. Could it be that Sardinia was their homeland all along? Or could Sardinia have been only one outpost, one visible remnant of a seafaring civilization that ranged far wider than we know? Despite growing evidence, no single theory has achieved consensus. Some researchers believe the Shardana were originally from Anatolia or the Levant, displaced by climate or conflict, and later settled in Sardinia. Others suggest the opposite, that they originated on Sardinia and launched raids across the Mediterranean from their coastal strongholds. The archaeological record is frustratingly incomplete. Bronze weapons, ceremonial swords, and stylized helmets are found, but few inscriptions. No Shardana language has ever been recovered. No texts, no chronicles, no libraries. Only images, etched into temple walls thousands of miles away. And that raises a haunting question. How could such a formidable people, capable of crossing seas and challenging empires, leave behind so little? Some believe the answer lies in their nature. The Shardana may have been less a static nation than a mobile warrior elite. Seafarers, perhaps even pirates, whose power lay in mobility, not permanence. Their settlements may have been seasonal or decentralized. Their knowledge oral, not written, and their allegiance fluid, shifting with tides of war and opportunity. But other theories push deeper. Some fringe researchers have speculated that the Shardana were part of a forgotten pan-Mediterranean civilization, one that predated the classical powers and whose memory lingers in scattered fragments. The Nuragic towers of Sardinia, the Talayats of the Balearic Islands, the Cyclopean walls of Mycenae the lost port cities of the Levant. Could the Shardana have been part of a broader cultural network, one that spanned coasts, traded in silence, and vanished before the scribes of history could catch them? There are also tantalizing clues in local tradition. In Sardinia, folk tales speak of an ancient race of giants who built the Nuraj. Some villagers claim their ancestors came from the sea. Even today, rituals are held that seem to echo older ceremonies. Processions that mimic military formation. Dances performed around stone monuments whose meaning has been lost. The Shardana are never mentioned by name, but their presence somehow seems to linger. Geologists have also noted that parts of the island remain underexplored. Dense forests, remote mountain valleys, and underwater coastal shelves may still hold unexcavated ruins. Could the key to the Shardana's origin, perhaps even their language or burial practices, be lying just beneath the surface, obscured by time and sediment? And what of their fate? Did they vanish with the collapse of the Bronze Age, like so many others? Were they absorbed into the growing empires of the Iron Age? Phoenicians, Carthaginians, Romans? Or did they retreat, quietly, into the interior of their island, leaving behind only stone towers and forgotten names? The mystery endures. In the silence of Sardinia's highlands, where Nurag still cast shadows at dusk, it's easy to imagine the sound of bronze striking stone, the glint of a horned helmet on the horizon, the rhythmic beat of oars cutting across dark water. Who were the Shardana? Warriors, builders, wanderers, or something else entirely? Perhaps they are not gone, but simply hidden, not lost, but waiting for us to read the sea, the stone, and the silence more carefully. And in the space between what is known and what is remembered, they might still be watching. As the winds die down along the craggy shores of Sardinia and the last echoes of the Shardana fade into the sea, our gaze shifts eastward, across the wine-dark waters of the Aegean. There, rising from the northern edge of the sea, lies a quiet island often overlooked by modern eyes. Lemnos. Rugged, windswept, and steeped in myth, this island holds a secret that has puzzled historians for over a century. A faint, fragmentary whisper from a time before the Greeks, before the myths had names. A vanished people, known today only as the Lemnian Culture. At first glance, Lemnos seems like any other island in the northern Aegean, its olive groves, scattered villages, and ruined fortresses painting a familiar Mediterranean picture. But beneath the soil, something unusual lingers. In 1885, on the eastern slope of the island near Kaminia, workers unearthed a stone stele, flat, weathered, and inscribed with writing. It was unlike anything seen before on the island. Known now as the Lemnian stele, the artifact sent a quiet shock through the world of archaeology. The language was not Greek. Instead, it bore striking similarities to Etruscan, the mysterious tongue spoken in pre-Roman Italy, whose origins have long defied definitive explanation. The characters etched into the stone matched Etruscan script. The grammar, even the names, suggested a connection. And yet Lemnos lies hundreds of miles from Tuscany, separated by sea, culture, and time. How could a script so closely tied to central Italy appear on an Aegean island centuries before Roman influence? The Lemnian stele is generally dated to the 6th century BC, but the culture it hints at, the people who wrote those words and carved that stone, remains shadowed in obscurity. No other inscriptions from this group have been found on Lemnos in substantial form. No extensive ruins, no tombs with engraved names, just fragments, pottery, hints of settlement, and this solitary text, standing like a sentinel over lost memory. So who were the Lemnians? One theory suggests that they were part of a broader pre-Greek substrate, a wave of settlers who reached the Aegean before Hellenic civilization took root. perhaps they were seafarers from the west, moving across the Mediterranean long before the rise of classical city-states. If so, their connection to the Etruscans might imply a shared origin, or at the very least, sustained contact between cultures often considered isolated. But there is another possibility. Could Lemnos have been one of the last outposts of a civilization older than both Greece and Etruria? A bridge between east and west, preserved on a windswept island long enough for a few words, just a few, to endure. Mainstream historians remain cautious. Some argue that the Lemnian script's resemblance to Etruscan is a result of parallel development or an artifact of trade. Others suggest that Etruscan merchants or mercenaries settled temporarily on Lemnos, bringing their language with them. And yet, the presence of a local dialect and a distinct funerary culture suggests something deeper than a passing visit. Further complicating the picture are the island's mythological associations. In Greek tradition, Lemnos is a place of exile and estrangement. It was said to be the domain of Hephaestus, god of fire and forge, who was cast from Olympus and landed here, wounded and broken. The island was later described in myth as being inhabited by the Sintians, a people known for their strange language. Homer himself referred to Lemnos as the land of the wild-speaking men. Could these stories be faint memories of a real people, those who spoke a tongue foreign even to the Greeks, and whose culture had already begun to fade by the time the myths were written? Some fringe theories have speculated that the Lemnians were remnants of a proto-Mediterranean civilization, one that predated the Indo-European migration and left scattered fingerprints across the ancient world. Others have drawn connections to the Sea Peoples, or even to lost cultures submerged beneath the rising seas at the end of the last ice age. These ideas remain speculative, but the mystery endures. What remains most striking is how little we know. The Lemnian stele is still not fully understood. Its language, while related to Etruscan, remains only partially translated. Its meaning, whether it marks a grave, a dedication, or a political statement, is uncertain. And until more texts are found, the story it wants to tell remains locked away. Archaeological surveys of Lemnos continue to reveal tantalizing clues. Layers of habitation stretching back thousands of years, fortifications buried under layers of ash and earth, unexplored caves and hillside ruins lost in the undergrowth. Could deeper excavations one day uncover a city, a temple, or another stele? Could there be more waiting beneath the fields and stones, an archive forgotten by time? Perhaps the Lemnian culture did not vanish in conquest or collapse, but was absorbed, its words forgotten, its structures repurposed, its stories diluted into Greek myth. Or perhaps, like so many civilizations on the fringe, it retreated quietly into memory, leaving only fragments behind. And so, we are left with a name, a stone, and the wind that moves across the Aegean. Was Lemnos once a crossroads of forgotten worlds, a final whisper from a people who stood between empires? Whatever the truth, the island waits, quiet, unassuming, and still holding its silence. And in that silence, the Lemnians may still speak, if only we learn how to listen. And as the winds of Lemnos fall silent, carrying with them the last forgotten words of the Lemnian culture, we now journey far south, down the length of the Americas, beyond deserts, mountains, and forests, to a place where land fractures into countless islands, and the sea becomes a maze of cold, mist-shrouded channels. Here, in the extreme southern reaches of Chilean Patagonia, among the fjords, ice-clad peaks, and tangled archipelagos of the Chiloé and Aysén regions, a different kind of civilization once moved quietly through the waters. A seafaring people, elusive, self-sufficient, and nearly invisible to time. They were known as the Chono. To most, their name is little more than a footnote in colonial records. mentioned briefly by Spanish explorers and missionaries as inhabitants of the fragmented islands south of Chiloé. And yet, for centuries, the Chono people thrived in one of the harshest environments on Earth. They built no cities, left no stone temples or written histories. Their trails were etched only into waves, fog, and memory. But in the silence of the sea channels, their legacy still whispers. The Chono were maritime nomads, expert navigators of the labyrinthine waterways that cut through the Patagonian fjords. They traveled in canoes made of coiled planks called dalkas, perfectly suited for the rough, unpredictable seas of the southern Pacific. They fished, hunted sea lions, gathered shellfish, and moved seasonally from island to island. Their dwellings were temporary domed huts of bark and skins. Their world was fluid, shifting like the tides. And then, they vanished. By the late 18th century, the Chono were considered extinct by colonial authorities. Disease, displacement, forced assimilation, and missionary pressure all contributed to their disappearance from historical record. Some were absorbed into neighboring groups, such as the Kaweskar or Huiliche. Others may have retreated even deeper into the coastal wilds. But no decisive moment marked their end. Like the fog that so often surrounds their homeland, the Chono simply drifted from view. But did they truly vanish? In recent decades, scholars and explorers have returned to the islands once inhabited by the Chono, and they've found signs that the story may not be over. Local fishermen and Patagonian families speak of isolated settlements, clusters of huts found deep in remote fjords, long abandoned yet strangely recent in construction. Some have reported encountering individuals or families in the 20th century who lived in near total isolation, speaking in dialects not fully recognized, claiming no clear ancestry. In the densest corners of the archipelago, where no roads reach and boats travel for days without sight of another human, could remnants of the Chono have survived, hidden in the folds of a landscape no empire ever truly conquered? There is also the question of identity. The Chono left no written language. Their traditions were preserved through practice, memory, and navigation. Maps passed hand to hand, carved into experience rather than parchment. Spanish chroniclers recorded only fragments, often distorted by misunderstanding. What we call Chono may not have been a single people, but a diverse group of seafaring clans, linked by territory, lifestyle, and necessity, but independent in thought and language. Could some of those groups have simply chosen to disappear? Archaeological evidence is sparse but evocative. Midden heaps of shells and bones, remnants of dalka workshops, fire pits buried under moss and soil. These humble remains speak of continuity, of a people who lived lightly on the land but deeply in rhythm with the sea. Their spiritual practices, hinted at through ritual hearths and burial placements, remain largely unknown. The Chono cosmology, how they saw themselves in relation to the water, sky, and shifting coastlines, was never fully recorded. That knowledge may have vanished, or perhaps it was never meant to be shared. And then there are the maps. Early Spanish charts of the region occasionally mark settlements or anchor points far deeper into the archipelagos than expected. Some show names and notes referencing native harbors, safe passages, and places of gathering, entries that later cartographers quietly removed as those areas became uninhabited. Did these marks represent real Chono territories? And if so, why were they erased? Some researchers suggest that the Chono deliberately misled colonial explorers, steering them away from sacred sites, confusing their maps, vanishing into labyrinths of islands known only to them. Others argue that the geography itself provided cover. With over 5,000 islands and countless uncharted inlets, it would have been, and still is, entirely possible to live unnoticed for generations. Could some Chono lineages have survived into the present, their names changed, their identity protected by silence? Could the people we now call by other labels, isolated fishers, remote subsistence communities, carry within them the living thread of this vanished culture? Even today, the Patagonian fjords are among the most remote places on Earth. Much of the region remains poorly mapped. Satellite imagery often cannot penetrate the dense fogs and overhanging canopies. Boats, not roads, remain the only means of travel. Entire islands may go years without a visitor. So what exactly is still out there? A forgotten canoe resting in a tidal cove? A language still spoken in whispers around a fire no one else will see? Or perhaps an entire way of life preserved in secret, guarded by the silence of water and the resolve of a people who once knew the cost of being found? The wind still moves through the channels, the sea still speaks in its ancient rhythm, and somewhere in that rhythm the Chono may still be listening, waiting for the world to remember that not all civilizations are lost through collapse. Some simply choose to disappear. As the waters of southern Patagonia recede behind us, quiet, mist-bound, and heavy with secrets, we turn now toward the cradle of ancient civilization, to a land where rivers are sacred, where reeds whisper beneath desert winds, and where history runs as deep as the Tigris and Euphrates. In southern Iraq and western Iran, along the marshes and canals of Mesopotamia, a quiet and enigmatic people have survived for centuries in the shadows of fallen empires. They are known as the Mandaeans, guardians of an ancient spiritual tradition, and perhaps the last living trace of something far older than we yet understand. But there are whispers of more, of lost Mandaean tribes, fragments of a once larger civilization that, like water through sand, slipped away from the record. Where did they go? Why did they disappear? And might some of them still be out there? To walk through the marshlands of southern Iraq, especially before the ecological devastation of the late 20th century, was to enter a world untouched by time. Floating reed islands, intricate canal systems, and isolated homesteads created a kind of labyrinth where knowledge could be preserved in silence. It is here that the Mandaeans have long lived, a Gnostic people who revere John the Baptist, reject violence, and practice complex rituals of purification, always centered around living water. Their sacred texts, such as the Ginza Rabba, speak of light and darkness, of soul and body, and of spiritual descent into the material world. They do not proselytize, they keep their rites close, and they write in Mandaic, a dialect of Eastern Aramaic that may echo back to the earliest centuries of our Common Era, or further still. But the Mandaeans themselves speak of something more. According to certain traditions, they once numbered many tribes, not just scattered families, but full-fledged groups that lived across the ancient Near East, from the marshes of Iraq to the deserts of Jordan, and perhaps even into Arabia. Some texts refer to these tribes obliquely, others more directly, but always with a sense of loss. They were exiled, scattered, or disappeared entirely. Who were these missing Mandaeans? Could they have been wiped out during the upheavals of the early Islamic conquests, or the wars between Persia and Rome? Were they absorbed into other cultures, Zoroastrian, Jewish, Christian, until their identity dissolved? Or did some of them go underground? Certain apocryphal traditions suggest that groups of Mandaeans fled deep into the Arabian Peninsula or eastward into the Zagros Mountains, preserving their beliefs in secret. Others were said to have taken refuge among the oases of the Syrian desert. And in a few rare instances, travelers from the 18th and 19th centuries, British officers, French missionaries, recorded strange encounters, isolated communities that practiced baptism rituals unlike those of Christians or Muslims who refused to speak of their origins. Were these remnants of lost Mandaean tribes? Linguistically and theologically, the Mandaeans are anomalous. Their scriptures contain cosmologies that mirror early Gnostic texts found at Nag Hammadi, texts once believed lost to history until rediscovered in Egypt in the mid-20th century. and yet the Mandaeans had preserved them all along in living tradition for nearly 2,000 years. Could the same be true for the tribes that vanished? Could there still be undiscovered pockets of people preserving versions of this ancient knowledge somewhere beyond the reach of the modern world? Some fringe researchers have drawn connections between the Mandaeans and the Essenes of Qumran, suggesting both were part of a broader Gnostic movement that predates mainstream Judaism and Christianity. Others go further still, proposing links to the Sabians of Haran, to Babylonian priestly cults, and even to Egyptian Hermeticism. These ideas remain speculative, but they raise a larger question. Was there once a widespread, loosely connected spiritual civilization across the Near East, one that has all but disappeared, save for the Mandaeans? If so, where are its final echoes? Modern archaeology has done little to explore the less tangible layers of Mandaean history. With so few monumental structures, and with most settlements based around waterways rather than stone, the physical evidence of their past is hard to trace. Their texts, preserved on parchment and in oral tradition, are vulnerable to decay. And with recent waves of persecution, migration, and cultural pressure, the living heart of their knowledge grows ever more endangered. And yet, something endures. Mandaean rituals remain exquisitely precise, unchanged, it seems, for centuries. Their symbols, their cosmology, their priesthood, none of it aligns easily with any known branch of Abrahamic religion. It is as if they stepped out of an earlier time, a forgotten sibling to the spiritual systems that later dominated the region. So we are left to wonder, did lost Mandaean tribes survive in the deserts of Arabia, in the mountains of Iran? Could one day a scholar stumble upon a cache of scrolls written in familiar Mandaic script, revealing the theology of a branch that history forgot? Or might a hidden community, so small, so isolated, still be practicing its rites in silence as it has for centuries? In the dust and reeds of Mesopotamia, truth is rarely loud. It whispers, and if you listen closely, you may still hear it. A chant in a forgotten tongue, a baptism under starlight, a memory that refuses to die. The Mandaeans remain. But where are the others? And as the marshes of southern Mesopotamia fade into memory, carrying with them the vanishing footprints of the Mandaean tribes, we now cross oceans and continents to arrive in the quiet lowlands of northeastern Louisiana. Here, on a broad terrace above the Mississippi River floodplain, lies a site that seems, at first, entirely unassuming. Grassy ridges arc in subtle patterns across the land, forming crescent shapes too symmetrical to be natural. Nearby, a great earthen mound rises above the landscape, silent, steady, watching. This is Poverty Point, a place built thousands of years ago. By whom? We still don't fully know. Discovered in the 19th century but only truly studied in the past few decades, Poverty Point is one of the most astonishing and mysterious archaeological sites in North America. Spanning nearly 900 acres, its complex of concentric ridges, radiating aisles, and monumental mounds was constructed between 1700 and 1100 BC, long before the rise of the Maya or the great cities of classical Greece. And yet, the people who built it left behind no name, no language, no clear identity. Who were they? What we do know is this: Poverty Point was not a random gathering place. The ridges were living spaces, arranged in a massive semicircular pattern that likely housed thousands of people. Mound A, a 70-foot-high earthwork shaped like a giant bird or talon, required the movement of an estimated 15 million basket loads of soil, done by hand, without beasts of burden, without metal tools. And it was built in an astonishingly short span, possibly as little as 90 days. The scale alone raises questions. This was not a village. This was a planned center, a ceremonial, political, or perhaps spiritual hub. But for whom? Archaeologists refer to the people behind it as part of the Poverty Point culture, yet the term masks our uncertainty. They were hunter-gatherers. No evidence of large-scale agriculture has been found, and yet their organizational capacity rivals that of later farming societies. They imported materials from as far as 800 miles away: copper from the Great Lakes, soapstone from the Appalachians, chert from the Ozarks. They crafted intricate tools, weights, beads, and effigies, some of which appear to have had symbolic or religious significance. And then, sometime around 1100 BC, the culture disappeared. The site was abandoned. The ridges slowly eroded. The great mound stood alone. Why? There are no signs of conquest, no mass graves, no fire or flood layers. Some theorize that shifting trade routes or ecological changes led to the site's decline. Others suggest that religious or cosmological shifts, beliefs lost to time, caused the people to move on. But no definitive answer has emerged. Even more curious is that no direct descendant culture has been clearly identified. The builders of Poverty Point seem to have appeared, flourished, and vanished, leaving behind a monumental legacy, but no name. And that has led some to ask, did they really vanish? Could remnants of this society have migrated elsewhere, blending into smaller tribal groups or settling new regions under different identities? Oral histories among some Native American groups speak of ancient ancestors who came from the east, from a great earthwork city built in circles. Are these echoes of Poverty Point? Some have speculated that the Poverty Point builders were part of a broader pan-continental tradition, an ancient civilization that connected mound-building cultures from the Mississippi Valley to the Gulf Coast and beyond. Later cultures such as the Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippian peoples also built mounds, organized towns, and traded across vast distances. But the chronological gap remains puzzling. Poverty Point predates them all, and no clear cultural continuity links them directly. Then there are the unexplained alignments. Some researchers believe that parts of Poverty Point's design correspond to solar and lunar events. The radiating isles may point to solstice sunrises or moonrises, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of astronomy. If true, the builders would have had not only engineering knowledge, but a cosmological framework complex enough to shape monumental architecture. But if that knowledge existed, where did it go? Unlike other ancient centers, Teotihuacan, Angkor, or even Cahokia, Poverty Point does not appear to have been rediscovered, re-inhabited, or ritualized by later groups. It was not built upon. It was not adopted. It was simply left. And that, perhaps, is what makes it so haunting. Because the silence speaks. It suggests a people whose purpose, whose story, may have been deliberately obscured by time, by nature, or by choice. Could they have chosen to leave no lasting trace of themselves beyond their architecture? Was their knowledge passed on in ways we cannot recognize, in symbols carved into stone that we no longer understand? Or could a part of them still remain, in hidden mounds overgrown by forest, in stories not yet heard, in descendants unaware of the legacy buried beneath their feet? Poverty Point challenges our assumptions about complexity, about civilization, about who writes history and who disappears into it. Its quiet presence endures, and in that quiet, we are left with questions still waiting to be answered. Who built it? Where did they go? And what else might be sleeping beneath the earth, waiting patiently for us to listen? And as we leave behind the earthwork spirals of Poverty Point, so deliberate, so silent, we cross back over the Atlantic into the mists of ancient Europe. Our journey now takes us to the dense forests and broad plains that stretch from the Carpathians to the Black Sea, a land of rivers that flow like veins through the soil of time. A land once haunted by a people whose name has nearly faded, but whose traces remain scattered like bones beneath the hills. They were the Agathyrsi, a civilization spoken of in riddles by ancient historians and largely forgotten by the modern world. The earliest mention of the Agathyrsi comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC. He described them as a richly adorned, tattooed people living in what is now Romania and western Ukraine. They were said to wear gold jewelry in great abundance and to practice a strange form of communal marriage. They shared wives, he wrote, so that all men might regard one another as brothers. They painted their bodies, wore elaborate garments, and, perhaps most intriguingly, held their kings and laws sacred above all else. But who were they really? Even in the ancient world, the Agathyrsi were an enigma. Herodotus suggested they were kin to the Scythians, the nomadic horse riders of the Eurasian steppe. Others hinted at links to the Thracians or Dacians, peoples known for their warrior culture and rich spiritual traditions. And yet the Agathyrsi stood apart. Their customs were unique. Their appearance, their rituals, even their beliefs seemed to form a civilization not quite like any other. Archaeologically, the trail is difficult to follow. Burial mounds, kurgans, dot the landscapes once associated with Agathyrsi territory. Many are filled with items characteristic of Scythian craftsmanship: bronze weapons, gold ornaments, horse harnesses. But in some cases, the graves seem different. Bodies are adorned with jewelry not typical of the steppe cultures. Grave goods suggest settled life, not full nomadism. Some tombs show evidence of elite status: rulers, perhaps priests, laid to rest with ceremonial objects whose purpose is still unknown. Were these the graves of the Agathyrsi? Or merely their neighbors? Linguistically, the puzzle deepens. The Agathyrsi left behind no written language of their own, at least none that has been discovered. What little we know comes through the lens of foreign observers. But certain clues have survived. Some scholars speculate that the name Agathyrsi itself may derive from a Thracian or Indo-Iranian root, suggesting a blend of traditions, a people standing at the crossroads of cultures. Their homeland, after all, was a point of convergence, where the Danube bends, where the steppe meets the forest, where east and west touched. So what became of them? By the time of Roman expansion into Dacia, the Agathyrsi are no longer mentioned. They vanish from the written record. Some believe they were absorbed into the larger Dacian tribes, their name lost as empires shifted and borders changed. Others think they were wiped out by waves of conquest, from Scythians, from Celts, from Rome itself. But perhaps they simply faded, retreated into the mountains, into myth, into silence. And yet, whispers remain. In Romanian folklore, there are stories of ancient kings who ruled before Dacia, kings who wore tattoos like armor, who spoke the language of stars and forests. In certain villages near the Carpathians, archaeological surveys have uncovered fragments of unknown origin. Carvings of figures in robes holding symbols that match no known alphabet. Some researchers have found unusual patterns in DNA samples from the region, suggesting the persistence of a distinct population long after written history had forgotten their name. And then there is the gold. In tombs stretching from the Tisza River to the Transylvanian Plateau, golden artifacts have been unearthed, crafted with incredible skill. Some of these items show iconography not seen in Scythian or Thracian art: faces with radiant eyes, sunburst symbols, stylized birds. Are these remnants of the Agathyrsi elite? Or echoes of an older spiritual system preserved in metal and buried in earth? Some fringe theorists have even proposed that the Agathyrsi were not just a people, but the custodians of forgotten knowledge, an initiatic priestly caste lost in the folds of time. They point to the writings of Dacian seers, the mysterious sanctuary of Sarmizegetusa, and ancient references to sacred laws upheld with religious fervor. Could the Agathyrsi have been something more than a tribe? Could they have been a secret-keeping class? Preservers of cosmology, astronomy, and rites that predated the rise of empire? These ideas are speculative, but they are not without intrigue. In a world where history is often written by victors, the quiet civilizations, those who did not build empires but sustained balance, tend to disappear. The Agathyrsi may have been such a people. Their story lies not in grand monuments, but in the silence between the hills, in the curve of gold unearthed from a forgotten tomb, in the pattern of tattoos described by a man who met them 2,500 years ago. So we are left with a name, a handful of artifacts, and a question. Did the Agathyrsi vanish into history? Or did they slip, purposefully, into the spaces where memory fades, but never quite dies? The forests of the Carpathians still whisper, and perhaps, somewhere within them, the Agathyrsi still watch, waiting to be remembered. And as the winds of the Carpathian highlands rustle the imagined banners of the Agathyrsi, we remain in the mountains, but shift forward in time into another kind of disappearance. Not one sealed by ancient conquest or buried beneath centuries of soil, but a vanishing written in memory, in exile, and in silence. Our path now winds deeper into the Carpathians, through misted valleys, pine-covered slopes, and wooden churches tucked into folds of forgotten land. This is the world of the Lemko people. Their villages once dotted the ridgelines of southeastern Poland, northeastern Slovakia, and western Ukraine, an ethereal borderland where cultures met but never quite merged. Today, much of that land lies quiet. Crumbling cottages peek through overgrown thickets. Carved wooden grave markers lean beneath moss and snow. The names on old maps have faded. And yet, if you listen carefully, the echo of a unique identity still lingers in the wind. Who were the Lemkos? At first glance, they seem like one of many small Slavic ethnic groups in Eastern Europe. But the deeper you look, the more elusive the truth becomes. The Lemkos speak a dialect of East Slavic. Some call it a variety of Ukrainian, others see it as a language of its own. Their churches follow the Byzantine rite, yet are neither fully Orthodox nor fully Catholic. Their traditions blend Christian and pagan elements, with fire rituals, sacred groves, and songs that speak to the cycles of earth and sky. Their architecture, too, is distinct. Three-domed wooden churches, painted in rich greens and blues, unlike any other in Europe. Their embroidery patterns are geometric, sometimes uncannily similar to motifs seen in ancient Scythian art. Their stories often center on wandering saints, enchanted mountains, and beings that watch from the forest. But perhaps what makes the Lemkos most mysterious is not just what they left behind, but the way they vanished. For centuries, the Lemkos lived in relative isolation, forming tight-knit highland communities across the Carpathian Arc. They were farmers, shepherds, and craftspeople. They weathered the rise and fall of empires, from the Austro-Hungarian crown to the shifting borders of Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Ukraine. But it was not until the 20th century that the rupture came. Following World War II, under the shadow of political paranoia and ethnic reshuffling, the Lemkos were targeted during Operation Vistula, a mass-forced relocation carried out by the Polish Communist government in 1947. Accused of harboring Ukrainian separatist sentiment, over 140,000 Lemkos and other Ukrainians were torn from their ancestral lands and resettled in scattered regions across the western and northern parts of Poland, often in areas recently vacated by Germans. The disruption was total. Families were separated, language was lost, sacred sites were abandoned, and yet, something remained. In the decades since, scholars, linguists, and descendants have begun to trace the outlines of a culture that never fully disappeared. Songs recorded in exile recall mountain passes never seen again. Folk tales passed down in kitchens tell of a time when the land itself breathed. And in recent years, there has been a quiet return. Lemko festivals are held once more in the mountains. Churches have been restored. Graves have been cleared. But still, many mysteries remain. For instance, where did the Lemkos truly come from? Some historians classify them as part of the Rusin family, Eastern Slavs who settled the Carpathians during the medieval period. Others suggest they descend from an even older lineage, perhaps merging with early Slavic settlers as they moved through the mountains. There are legends among the Lemkos themselves that they are not like the surrounding peoples, that their blood is older, quieter, drawn from some earlier source. Some tales even speak of forest ancestors, beings who taught them how to live in harmony with the hills. And there are stranger clues. In certain Lemko villages, symbols carved into wood and woven into textiles bear remarkable resemblance to solar cults of pre-Christian Europe. Scholars have noted that some Lemko songs appear to encode astronomical knowledge, phases of the moon, solstices, alignments with local peaks. Could these be remnants of a spiritual system that predates Christianization, preserved in layers so subtle they've gone unnoticed for centuries? Even more intriguingly, archaeological surveys of old Lemko cemeteries and abandoned homesteads have uncovered artifacts whose origins are hard to place. Bronze amulets, talismans shaped like birds, and pottery styles that don't clearly match neighboring traditions. Are these echoes of an older Carpathian civilization? Or signs of a cultural memory far deeper than we currently understand? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, did all the Lemkos leave? The Carpathians remain vast, and in many places, sparsely populated. Deep valleys remain untouched by modern infrastructure. Some have speculated that small, isolated Lemko communities may have survived the deportations, hidden in the folds of the mountains, speaking their dialect in whispers, practicing their rites in secret. There are occasional stories from hikers or foresters of hearing unfamiliar chants in abandoned churches, of encountering elders who speak a language not quite Polish, not quite Ukrainian. Could these be the remnants of a lost civilization still flickering at the edges of modernity? The Lemko story is not one of collapse, but of quiet endurance. A people carved from stone and mist, displaced, forgotten, but never fully gone. And as the mountain fog curls once more around the forests of the Beskid Range, we're left to wonder, what else sleeps in the silence of the Carpathians? What memories still walk the wooded paths in bodies we no longer recognize? The Lemkos may still be out there, not vanished but hidden, waiting, as ever, in the shadow of the pines. And as the quiet shadows of the Carpathians settle behind us, where the Lemko spirit still drifts through the pines and forgotten footpaths, we turn south, far south, to the arid highlands and sunlit plateaus of the Horn of Africa. Here, among the rugged mountains and ancient stone terraces of modern-day Eritrea and northern Ethiopia, lies the barely remembered echo of a kingdom that predates Aksum and the rise of Christianity in the region. A civilization shrouded in ambiguity, whose name is rarely spoken, and whose disappearance still stirs questions among archaeologists and historians alike. This is the mystery of the Kingdom of Damat. Scattered across the Tigray highlands are enigmatic stone ruins, cut with precision, aligned with care. Fortress-like structures, irrigation systems, and stepped terraces lie weathered beneath centuries of wind and sun. Inscriptions in an ancient script called South Arabian Musnad are etched into stone slabs, suggesting a literacy and connection to the Arabian Peninsula. And yet these are not Arab lands. These are African highlands, rich in history, and still not fully understood. The Mat Kingdom, by most accounts, emerged around the 10th century BC and flourished until roughly the 5th century BC. It is considered by many scholars to be one of the earliest known complex societies in the Horn of Africa, predating the famed Kingdom of Axum by several centuries. Its capital is believed to have been at Yhw, where the remains of a towering temple still stand today, constructed of finely fitted ashlar blocks without mortar, its symmetry and durability reminiscent of techniques used in ancient Yemen. But here is where the mystery deepens. The Temple of Yhw is clearly influenced by Sabaean architecture, the style of the Kingdom of Saba, across the Red Sea in what is now Yemen. But the extent of this influence and the nature of the Demt kingdom itself remain matters of heated debate. Was Demt a colony of South Arabian traders? A local civilization borrowing architectural forms from its trading partners? Or was it something else entirely? A native African kingdom with its own identity, quietly rising before history had a name for it? The answers are elusive. No royal tombs have been definitively identified. No annals or administrative records have survived. What we know of Demt comes from fragments, inscriptions, pottery, foundations of temples and fortresses scattered across the highlands. And while the architectural record speaks of sophistication, the silence of the historical record is deafening. Then, just as suddenly as it appears, Demt vanishes. By the 5th century BC, there are no more inscriptions, no new temples. The archaeological signal fades. Later, around the 1st century AD, the Kingdom of Axum rises nearby. An empire that would go on to mint its own coins, develop a written script, and become one of the great powers of the ancient world. But in Axum's own records, there is no mention of Demt, no homage, no reference, no continuity acknowledged. What happened in the intervening centuries? Was Demt a direct predecessor to Axum? Its structures repurposed, its elites folded into a rising power? Or was it wiped away, culturally erased, its name removed from memory? Some suggest that environmental changes may have played a role, shifts in climate that made certain agricultural systems unsustainable. Others point to political fragmentation. Perhaps Demt was never a unified kingdom, but a confederation of local rulers, dissolved by conflict or absorbed into competing tribal systems. Still others raise the possibility of a religious transformation, one that saw temples abandoned, symbols replaced, and past dynasties forgotten in favor of a new spiritual vision. And then there are the more speculative theories. Some researchers have noted that the Horn of Africa remains one of the most underexplored regions in terms of ancient archaeology. Political instability, remote terrain, and limited access have left many ancient sites unexcavated. Satellite imagery has revealed potential settlements, walls, and road systems hidden beneath the landscape, sites that may hold clues to Demet's true scope and purpose. Could there be, buried beneath centuries of sediment and silence, the ruins of a royal city, a library, a necropolis that might finally speak the name of the forgotten kings? Others have suggested that the civilization never truly disappeared, but transformed, hidden within local oral traditions, still alive in ritual, language, and lineage. Among some highland communities, ancient stories speak of an age of stone builders, of priest kings who knew the secrets of water and sky. Are these echoes of Demt, refracted through centuries of retelling? And what of the Temple of Yhw itself? Despite its age, it still stands, a structure without mortar, unmoved by time, weather, or war. Within its stones lies a precision and a silence that defies easy explanation. Was this truly just a temple? Or was it part of a larger sacred complex, now lost, whose function and meaning remain concealed? We may never know. But as the sun sets over the Ethiopian highlands, casting long shadows across fields of basalt and granite, the air still holds a sense of presence, not absence, not loss, but something waiting. Was Dempt an empire without memory, a civilization erased, or simply a kingdom still out there, its story buried in stone, its name not lost, but whispered where no one has yet listened? In the silence of the highlands, the past has not vanished, it waits. And as the stone silence of Dempt lingers beneath the highland skies of Eritrea and northern Ethiopia, we move now across deserts and ancient battlefields to a place where history and myth intertwine with eerie precision, to a land of sacred valleys and forgotten cities, where memory clings not only to the ruins, but to the shadows they cast. Welcome to the realm of the Rephaim. Mentioned in ancient texts with a strange, almost fearful reverence, the Rephaim are a people, or perhaps something more, spoken of in the Hebrew Bible and other ancient Near Eastern records. Their name is often translated as giants, shades, or spirits of the dead. Yet these interpretations are uncertain. For while the Rephaim are sometimes cast as mythic beings, elsewhere they appear as historical actors, rulers of cities, lords of the underworld, remnants of a forgotten race. Could they have once been real? And if so, what happened to them? To begin understanding the mystery, we must look to the landscape of Bashan, a high plateau in modern-day southern Syria and northern Jordan. This region, rich in volcanic soil and ancient trade routes, is home to vast fields of megalithic ruins, including massive stone circles, dolmens, and subterranean chambers. Among them stands Rujum el-Hiri, a sprawling monument of concentric stone rings dating back to at least 3000 BC. Often called the Stonehenge of the Levant, its original purpose remains unknown. Tomb, temple, astronomical observatory, but some locals know it by another name, Gilgal Rephaim, the Circle of the Rephaim. This connection is not incidental. Biblical references place the Rephaim in Bashan, naming them as ancient inhabitants of the land before the arrival of the Israelites. In the book of Deuteronomy, they are described as giants, a people great and many and tall. Their most famous king, Og of Bashan, is said to have ruled over 60 fortified cities, his bed described as over 13 feet long. But even this strange detail invites debate. Is it metaphor or memory? Some researchers believe the Rephaim may have been a real tribe or confederation of peoples, tall, perhaps genetically distinct and culturally dominant in the region before being absorbed or destroyed by later powers. Their mention in multiple biblical books, including Genesis, Joshua, and 2 Samuel, suggests they were remembered not as a legend, but as a vanished civilization, feared and revered alike. Archaeological evidence from the region offers some curious clues. Across Bashan, hundreds of dolmens, large stone burial structures, dot the hillsides, many dating to the early Bronze Age. Some contain skeletal remains of individuals notably taller than average for the time. Others have been found empty, sealed with great care. Who were these people? Why did they construct such massive tombs? More strangely, some of these burial sites align with solar and lunar events, suggesting a cosmology far more sophisticated than expected for a presumed pastoral or tribal culture. Was this evidence of priest-kings, of a forgotten theological system, or of a civilization whose knowledge, like its name, was later obscured? Some traditions suggest the Rephaim were not simply mortal kings, but semi-divine beings, offspring of gods and humans, or survivors of an earlier, antediluvian world. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text excluded from most biblical canons, speaks of giants born from the union of the Watchers and the daughters of men, beings who corrupted the earth before the Great Flood. After their destruction, the spirits of these giants, it is said, became the restless dead, the Rephaim. Could this be mythologized memory? A narrative built around a real but misunderstood people? And what of the name itself? The Hebrew root Rapha means to heal or to release, but in its plural form, Rephaim, it comes to denote the shades of the dead. In Ugaritic texts from ancient Syria, the Rapiuma are described as ancestral spirits, kings of old who dwell in the underworld but are invoked in sacred rituals. Could the Rephaim have originally been the deified ancestors of a vanished elite, later transformed in folklore into ghosts, giants, or demons? Over time, the identity of the Rephaim blurs, bleeding into both history and myth. But their traces endure, in stone circles buried under dust, in names etched on forgotten maps, in the uncanny similarity between tombs in Bashan and other megalithic cultures across the Mediterranean. Some fringe theories go further, linking the Rephaim with broader Eurasian traditions of giant kings or lost hybrid dynasties. Others see them as the last remnants of a pre-flood civilization, one erased from surface memory but preserved in architecture and scripture. These interpretations remain unproven, but they point to a central question. Why do so many cultures preserve stories of giants, of ancient ones who ruled and then vanished? Perhaps the Rephaim were not giants of stature, but giants of memory. Figures so culturally dominant, so spiritually potent, that later civilizations could not fully erase them, so they reclassified them. As legends, as monsters, as gods. But the ruins still remain. And in the highlands of Bashan, beneath basalt hills and starlit skies, the stones continue to guard their secrets. Who were the Rephaim? A forgotten people? A priestly caste? Something more? And if the stories are even partially true, if even one thread of memory is accurate, could a trace of them still exist? In hidden chambers? In undiscovered texts? In bloodlines no longer named? The land has not forgotten. The stones still remember. And the Rephaim may yet wait, silent beneath the earth. And as the basalt tombs of Bashan fade into shadow, their silent sentinels still guarding the riddle of the Rephaim, we now turn east, far east, into the mist-covered mountains of southern China. Here, where sheer cliffs rise above roaring rivers and clouds coil through ancient canyons, something unexpected clings to the stone. Coffins, suspended from vertical rock faces, dozens of feet above the ground. Wooden boxes weathered by centuries, perched in silence on beams driven deep into the cliffside. Some are balanced on natural ledges, others rest within shallow caves carved into the limestone. These are not modern burials. These are the remnants of a vanished people. They were known as the Bo. Little is known of this mysterious ethnic group. Once inhabiting parts of present-day Sichuan, Yunnan, and Guizhou provinces, the Bo people have long since disappeared from official records. What remains of their culture survives largely in fragments, scattered artifacts, oral traditions, and the haunting presence of their skyward tombs. And yet, their story refuses to be forgotten. Who were the Bo? The name Bo appears in Chinese texts as early as the Zhou dynasty, records from over 1,500 years ago. Described at times as fierce warriors, at other times as skilled artisans, the Bo occupied a rugged mountainous landscape. Chinese imperial chronicles often referred to them as one of many barbarian tribes resisting assimilation. But what made the Bo unique was their death ritual, a practice that still puzzles researchers to this day. They did not bury their dead in the earth, nor entomb them in towers or mounds. Instead, they hoisted their coffins high above the world. cliffs hundreds of feet tall bear the marks of their funeral customs. These hanging coffins appear along river gorges, especially in regions near the Yangtze. Some date back over 1,000 years. Others are older still. Why did they place their dead there? Was it to bring the spirit closer to the heavens? To protect the bodies from desecration or animals? Or to mark the presence of the ancestors upon the land itself, as guardians over the living? No one can say for certain. Even more puzzling is how they did it. Many of the hanging coffins rest on rock faces so inaccessible that modern climbers struggle to reach them. The cliffs offer no foothold, no ledges, no trails. The engineering and bravery required to raise a coffin into such positions, many weighing hundreds of pounds, speaks to a level of skill and purpose that far exceeds what was once assumed of these mountain people. But sometime around the 15th century, the bow vanished. Local legends speak of massacres, of armies sent to destroy their strongholds. It's said that the bow resisted Ming dynasty expansion and were ultimately wiped out during a brutal campaign. Whole villages burned, entire lineages extinguished. Their name, their language, their traditions, erased from living memory. The coffins remained, high above the earth, as the only testimony to a people lost. And yet, are they truly gone? The mystery of the bow deepens in the margins of local culture. In isolated villages near the borders of Guizhou and Sichuan, old families speak of ancient ancestors who lived in the cliffs. Some hill tribes preserve burial rites that echo bow customs, raising coffins onto wooden stilts or placing them into cave mouths. Decorative motifs in certain textiles and carvings resemble patterns found on surviving bow artifacts, spirals, bird forms, and sunbursts. Could these be cultural remnants? Evidence that not all bow were destroyed, but that some survived, absorbed into neighboring communities, their identity diluted, but not erased. There are linguistic traces as well. While the bow language is officially classified as extinct, a few researchers have noted curious phonetic patterns in obscure dialects of the region, unusual tonal shifts, words without clear connection to Mandarin or known ethnic languages. Might these be faint echoes of bow speech, preserved in lullabies or farming chants passed down without understanding their origin? And then there are the unverified accounts. In the 20th century, several Chinese ethnographers reported hearing of remote villages, unreachable by road, where old burial platforms stood atop cliffs, untouched and unexplained. One report, never confirmed, spoke of a small community whose elders claimed descent from those who walk above the valley. No documentation followed. The trail went cold. But the cliffs remain. The hanging coffins, dozens still in place, others fallen and broken, continue to watch over the river valleys. They are not tourist sites. Many are nearly impossible to access. In some regions, locals refuse to disturb them, considering the dead sacred, or perhaps dangerous. What knowledge was buried with the bow? Were they philosophers, with a unique vision of life and death that required their spirits to hover between heaven and earth? Were they astronomers, aligning their burial sites with celestial patterns we have yet to decipher? Or were they simply a people who carved a unique identity in stone and wood, only to be struck from the story of history? In a country rich with written tradition, the bow left no texts, no known script, no carved laws or myths to guide us. Only the coffins, stark, solemn, and strangely beautiful, remain as their voice. What if something of the bow still survives? Not just in cultural memory, but in uncontacted corners, in forgotten rituals, or in unmarked caves deeper than we've dared to look. What else might be hidden in the shadows of the cliffs? As the mist gathers once more around the ridgelines of southern China, one cannot help but wonder, Are the bow truly gone? Or are they simply waiting to be seen again from above? And as the bow coffins sway silently above mist-covered cliffs, the memory of their vanished people suspended in midair, we turn now to a quieter mystery, one not carved into rock, but hidden in the folds of language, in the forested borderlands between India and Myanmar. A mystery of voices half forgotten, of ancestral knowledge wrapped in syllables no longer spoken aloud. This is the story of the Luish, a cultural enigma whose presence flickers faintly in the linguistic record, like echoes across a ravine. The terrain itself tells us something. Thick jungle stretches over the rolling hills of western Myanmar and northeastern India's Chin and Arunachal Pradesh regions. It is a land of cloud forests, bamboo groves, and winding rivers, remote and layered, with centuries of human settlement lost beneath its canopy. Within these hills once lived a people we now call Luish, a name not tied to a political kingdom or monumental ruin, but to a forgotten linguistic branch of the Tibeto-Burman family. Their language, now spoken fluently only in fragments by a handful of aging individuals, is the last whisper of a culture we scarcely understand. The Luish languages, also known as the Asakian group, once spread across this region in a faint arc, leaving behind linguistic traces in small, isolated pockets. The most prominent of these are Sak and Kadu, still spoken today by dwindling communities in northern Myanmar. These languages share roots with ancient Tibeto-Burman forms, but their grammar and vocabulary contain anomalies, structures not easily explained by known regional linguistic evolution. Were the Luish an offshoot of a larger migration, or something older, independent, perhaps even a holdover from a pre-Tibeto-Burman substratum? There is no clear answer. What we do know is this. By the time British colonial scholars began recording regional languages in the 19th century, the Luish tongues were already endangered. And yet, the little that has survived hints at a more widespread past. Comparative studies of Sak and Kadu suggest that they once diverged from a common language far older than their current distributions imply. This suggests migration, or perhaps displacement. But from where? And why? The Luish people have no known written tradition. No surviving temples or cities bear their name. Their stories, when collected, speak of flight, of forgotten wars, of villages burned and rivers crossed. Some tales describe ancestral homelands far to the northwest, now inaccessible. Others suggest that they were once part of a much larger web of forest tribes, later divided and assimilated into neighboring cultural identities. What remains is a patchwork. Songs remembered without meaning, place names no longer recognized, and an identity hanging by a thread. Yet even here, mystery persists. In 2019, linguists working in northern Myanmar reported the discovery of an undocumented dialect that bore striking similarities to both Kadu and Sak, but also contained entirely unique words, possibly relics from an even older stage of the language. Local elders claimed they had inherited it from ancestors who came from the Sky Mountains, a poetic phrase that may refer to highland regions now outside the range of surviving Luish speakers. Were these the remnants of a lost subgroup, cut off, isolated, but surviving through centuries of upheaval? Even more intriguing are archaeological sites in nearby Chin and Naga regions, hilltop settlements with stone alignments, megaliths and petroglyphs whose creators are still unidentified. Some researchers speculate they may have been early Luish settlements, but without inscriptions or clear cultural markers, the link remains uncertain. Unlike great empires whose disappearance leaves behind shattered cities and toppled statues, the Luish left little for archaeologists to unearth. But perhaps that is the point. Perhaps their civilization was never centralized, never monument building, but rather rooted in something more ephemeral. Knowledge passed orally. relationships mapped by kinship and memory rather than stone. A forest civilization designed to vanish into its surroundings when threatened, and perhaps that is what it did. Some anthropologists now believe that the Luish were among the earliest forest-dwelling peoples to be pushed aside by the spread of agriculture and larger state formations in the early 1st millennium AD. As powerful polities rose along the Irrawaddy and Brahmaputra rivers, the Luish people may have retreated further into the highlands, splintering, adapting, forgetting their name, but keeping fragments of their culture alive in language, ritual, and story. Which raises a haunting possibility. What if the Luish haven't vanished at all? What if they still live, not as a remembered kingdom, but as an unrecognized thread, woven through the identities of other groups, their presence hidden in plain sight? In the way a child greets the sun, in the phrasing of a lullaby, in the shape of a ritual offering made in a forest clearing. Linguists working today in the region still encounter words and grammar structures with no clear origin, features that don't fit surrounding languages. Could these be linguistic fossils, remnants of Luish influence preserved in unexpected places? And if so, how far did the Luish culture once reach? Could they have once been part of a larger, now lost network of forest peoples, traders, ritualists, navigators of the deep green interior? The forests still speak, but not always in ways we expect. The Luish may not offer us ruins or royal lineages, but in the subtle persistence of their language, in the living breath of a dialect almost forgotten, they may yet be telling a story the world has not fully heard. And in the quiet highlands between nations, where the canopy hides more than it reveals, the question lingers: are the Luish truly gone, or have they simply become the silence between the words? High above the Caribbean coast of Colombia, where the clouds hang low over sharp forested peaks, rises a mountain range unlike any other in the world. The Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. Towering over 18,000 feet, it is the highest coastal mountain on Earth, and perhaps the most mysterious. Here, amid the snow-capped ridges and thick jungle valleys, lives a people who call themselves the Elder Brothers. They are known to the outside world as the Kogi. To most, they are a remote indigenous tribe. But to some scholars, and to those who have walked among them, the Kogi are something far more profound. The living descendants of an ancient civilization that never truly disappeared. The landscape itself seems enchanted. From above, the mountains form a near-perfect pyramid, a sacred geometry hidden in plain sight. Rivers spiral from its heights like veins, feeding the forests below. In these heights, time seems suspended. White stone terraces cling to the mountainsides, remnants of forgotten cities that once pulsed with life. No roads lead here. There are no power lines, no internet, no towns. Only the paths, worn smooth by centuries of bare feet. And yet, the Kogi walk them still. Descendants of the Tairona, a pre-Columbian civilization that flourished for over 1,000 years. The Kogi have guarded their ancestral mountain since long before the first Spanish ships arrived. When the invaders came, the Tairona cities were burned or abandoned, their roads overtaken by jungle. But the Kogi did not disappear. They retreated into the heights, vanishing from maps but not from memory. They say they never left. In a world where most ancient cultures have been reduced to ruins and relics, the Kogi offer something profoundly different: continuity. Their language is intact, their temples still in use. Their priests, mamos, trained from birth in darkness, still guide their people with the same rituals, cosmology, and purpose as they have for centuries. The Kogi do not see themselves as survivors of a lost civilization. They believe they are the civilization, and they believe we are the ones who are lost. According to Kogi cosmology, the world was created by an all-knowing Mother Spirit who resides in the heart of the mountain. The Sierra Nevada, to them, is not just home, it is the center of the world. From here, they say, all life flows, and they see themselves as caretakers of balance, watching over the earth not with machines or maps, but through attunement, vision, and sacred knowledge passed down in silence. What's remarkable is how much of this echoes archaeological reality. Before their retreat, the Tairona built one of the most sophisticated urban networks in the Americas. Stone cities with stairways, plazas, and terraces woven into the slopes of the jungle. Ciudad Perdida, the lost city, discovered in the 1970s by treasure hunters, is only the most famous of these. But to the Kogi, it was never lost. They've always known it as Tiyuna, a sacred place where the Mamos still make offerings to the earth. How many more such cities remain hidden beneath the forest canopy? Satellite scans of the Sierra Nevada have revealed geometric formations deep in the jungle, perfect circles, linear clearings, signs of human modification where no current settlements exist. Could these be the last traces of other Tairona communities, swallowed by time, yet somehow preserved beneath the green veil? And the deeper question remains, if the Kogi hold living memory of these places, what else might they remember? In rare interviews, granted only after months of negotiation, the Mamos have spoken of sacred books not made of paper but of stones and stars, of knowledge that does not erode. They describe cycles of destruction and renewal, of past civilizations that once reached great heights but fell when they stopped listening to the mother. To them, modern civilization is but one more cycle in a long chain, blind, disconnected, spiraling toward collapse. What makes their warnings so haunting is not their mysticism, but their accuracy. In 1990, the Kogi broke centuries of silence to deliver a message to the outside world. They warned of climate change, deforestation, and the death of rivers, long before such concepts were widely accepted. They said the earth was out of balance, that the destruction of sacred sites and waters would bring ruin. Scientists at the time dismissed the claims as poetic, but 3 decades later, every prediction has come true. So where does the ancient end and the modern begin? Is the Kogi culture an unbroken chain to the Tairona, or something older still? An echo of an even more ancient Andean Atlantic network? Their gold work, their astronomical knowledge, and their understanding of ecology seem advanced even by today's standards. And their cities, built without the wheel or iron tools, speak to a mastery of engineering still not fully understood. Could they hold secrets from before recorded history? Could their oral traditions preserve knowledge of catastrophes long lost to time, of migrations, floods, or celestial events etched not in stone, but in memory? Or perhaps the real mystery is not what lies beneath the jungle floor, but what continues to breathe above it, in the hearts and minds of a people who never stopped listening. The Kogi do not seek to be found. They do not seek attention or validation. And yet, they persist, as living testimony to a civilization that might still be out there. Not as ruins, but as rhythm, as worldview, as guardians of a mountain pyramid older than any monument we've built. And as we look at their way of life, not with condescension but with curiosity, we are left to wonder, what else survives quietly in the high places of the earth? And what might we still learn from those who never left the path? Perhaps some civilizations are not lost. Perhaps they are simply hidden in plain sight, in the far northern reaches of the Pacific, where snow-laced winds sweep across volcanic islands and the sea breathes mist over pine-covered cliffs, lies Sakhalin, a place of haunting beauty and long-forgotten voices. The skies here remain heavy with silence. The forests are ancient, and the earth, even now, seems to whisper of lives once deeply intertwined with the spirits of mountain, river, and bear. This is the former domain of the Ainu, an enigmatic people whose origins remain as mist-shrouded as the island itself. The Ainu are often associated with Hokkaido, the northernmost island of Japan. But for centuries, perhaps millennia, they lived across a much wider territory. From the Kuril Islands and Sakhalin in the north to the northern tip of Honshu in the south, their presence once traced a forgotten arc across the boundary between Asia and the Pacific. Sakhalin, in particular, holds their deeper mysteries. The island, now part of the Russian Federation, is a vast and remote landmass, stretching over 600 miles in length. Its interior is rugged and heavily forested. Its coastlines are jagged and storm-lashed. Even today, parts of Sakhalin remain largely unexplored. And it was here, hidden among the rivers and forests, that a unique branch of the Ainu thrived, one that developed independently from their Hokkaido relatives, shaped by the rhythms of a harsher, colder world. But who were they, really? Linguistically, the Ainu language stands apart from any known language family. It is an isolate, with no proven relation to Japanese, Korean, or any other language in East Asia. Some have speculated links to Paleo-Siberian tongues, or even distant echoes of ancient Indo-European migrations, though none of these claims have been confirmed. The mystery deepens with the realization that the Ainu themselves do not record a moment of origin. Their stories speak not of arrival, but of emergence, of always having been part of the land. Genetically, too, they are distinct. Studies suggest that the Ainu carry a large percentage of Jomon ancestry, the Jomon being a prehistoric people who lived in Japan as far back as 14,000 BC. Some anthropologists believe that the Ainu may represent one of the oldest continuous cultural lineages in the region, their traditions forming a living bridge to a world before written history. And yet, in Sakhalin, that continuity has been nearly erased. During the 19th and 20th centuries, waves of colonization, first by the Russian Empire, then by the Japanese, disrupted the ancient Ainu lifeways. Forced resettlements, cultural suppression, and assimilation policies fractured their communities. By the mid-20th century, the Sakhalin Ainu had been declared extinct, on paper. But the mountains don't keep records, and neither do the rivers. Recent years have seen a quiet resurgence of interest. Genealogical traces in local families, isolated dialect fragments, and above all, memory. There are communities in Sakhalin's remote villages who still recall bear ceremonies, who speak of grandfathers that refused to cut their hair in the old Ainu style, and of lullabies sung in a tongue now considered dead. Is it possible that the Sakhalin Ainu were never truly erased, but merely went quiet? And if so, could some of them still live today, not as a visible, organized nation, but as an invisible lineage, hiding in plain sight within Russian or Nivk identities, waiting for the right moment to remember who they are? There is precedent. In Japan, the Ainu were long declared a vanished people, only to be formally recognized again as indigenous in 2008. That resurgence came not from archaeological discovery, but from within, from families choosing to reclaim names, language, and rituals long suppressed. Could the same happen in Sakhalin? There are reasons to believe the past may not be as far away as we think. In 2019, researchers conducting linguistic fieldwork along the Tim River discovered a few elderly individuals who could recall fragments of prayers in an unrecognized dialect, possibly a Creole of Ainu and Nivk. One woman described a ritual where a bear cub was raised in the home and ceremonially released, a tradition known from Hokkaido, but thought lost in Sakhalin. Other clues come from the landscape itself. Along Sakhalin's rivers, archaeologists have found earthen fortresses, petroglyphs, and burial mounds with features not entirely aligned with either Russian or Nivk cultural histories. Some of these may belong to the Okhotsk culture, a maritime people thought to have interacted with, or even evolved into, the northern Ainu. But the exact relationship remains unresolved. Could these traces be evidence of a Sakhalin Ainu continuum, a forgotten cultural thread extending from prehistory to the present, simply hidden by war, border shifts, and the silence of survival? Or could the Sakhalin Ainu have taken their knowledge deeper into the wilderness, retreating into the forests as they had done before, keeping their traditions intact in secret? The vastness of Sakhalin offers cover. Its interior remains one of the least documented areas in Northeast Asia. Could there be small communities that chose not to reemerge? We may never know for certain. But what's clear is that the story of the Ainu is far from over. It is not only one of loss, but of endurance, of identities folded into others, of voices soft but not silent. And so we are left with a question that echoes along the banks of the Tim, in the howling winds of the taiga. If the Ainu of Sakhalin still remember who they are, will the world remember to listen? And if we listen closely enough, past the borders and the silence, what else might still be out there, waiting to be heard? Far beyond the eastern shores of New Zealand, where the Pacific Ocean stretches vast and windswept, lie the Chatham Islands, a small, remote archipelago cloaked in mist, sea fog, and isolation. Here, on these lonely islands, carved by wind and sea, lived a people almost forgotten by time. The Moriori. The land itself feels untouched, ancient. The beaches are quiet, lined with driftwood that has traveled unimaginable distances. Inland, the rolling hills are blanketed in dense ferns and low, wind-sculpted trees. There are no towering mountains, no large rivers, only the haunting vastness of sky and sea. It is a landscape that whispers rather than speaks, and within that whisper lives a mystery. For centuries, the Moriori lived in near-complete isolation. Separated from the Maori of mainland New Zealand by over 500 miles of open ocean, they developed a culture both unique and hauntingly peaceful. Oral tradition tells us they arrived from Polynesia, likely from New Zealand's South Island, sometime between 1200 and 1500 AD. But something changed when they reached the Chathams. They chose peace. In a world where many early societies were shaped by conquest, the Moriori embraced Nunuku's law, a strict code of nonviolence named after a revered ancestor who, according to legend, forbade warfare after witnessing cycles of bloodshed. From that moment forward, the Moriori would never again raise arms against one another. Conflicts were resolved by consensus, exile, or ritual, not violence. And so, a civilization of extraordinary restraint and harmony emerged, quietly thriving at the edge of the world. But how long can peace exist in isolation? In 1835, this fragile world was shattered. Two groups of Maori warriors from mainland New Zealand, Ngati Mutunga and Ngati Tama, arrived on a hijacked European ship, bringing with them muskets, slavery, and a worldview shaped by very different values. The Moriori, true to their law, did not resist. They welcomed the newcomers, shared food, and tried to live alongside them. They were slaughtered. Over the next few years, hundreds of Moriori were killed. The survivors were enslaved, their language and customs banned. By the time formal colonial rule was established in the islands, it was widely believed that the Moriori had been exterminated, that the last truly peaceful civilization on Earth had vanished. But that, too, is a myth. In the late 20th century, descendants of the Moriori began to speak again. Hidden identities were reclaimed. Rituals were remembered. Words of the old language were passed down, preserved in the margins of colonial documents and within families who had been told to forget. Today, The Moriori people are no longer considered extinct. They are recognized, resurgent, still connected to the land their ancestors once walked. But the mystery lingers, not just in their story of survival, but in the deeper, unresolved questions. How did such a radically peaceful culture evolve in isolation? Was it a reaction to trauma from earlier times, or the blossoming of an entirely different worldview? And perhaps more curiously, what if some parts of that culture, those values, those ways of being, persist in places we have not yet looked? The Chatham Islands remain sparsely populated. Beyond the towns and restored marae, there are valleys and coasts where few tread. Could there be Moriori sites yet undiscovered? Burial grounds, stone structures, or carved trees still whispering their secrets in the salt-heavy wind? In recent years, archaeologists have begun uncovering evidence that suggests a more complex and advanced Moriori society than previously believed. Sophisticated fishing systems, storage pits, and signs of organized horticulture, petroglyphs, strange, abstract, and ancient, etched into stone along the coast. What meanings do they carry? Are they maps, star charts, or spiritual markers? No one yet knows. And the Moriori language itself, now being revived, holds unique grammatical structures and words not found in other Polynesian tongues. Is this the product of long separation, or does it hint at deeper, pre-Polynesian roots? Some fringe linguists have suggested the possibility of contact with other seafaring peoples, northern Pacific cultures, or even remnants of earlier, now-lost migration waves across Oceania. Most scholars remain cautious, but the isolation of the Chathams invites speculation. Could the Moriori be more than just a forgotten offshoot of Polynesian culture? Could they be the last visible link to a much older seafaring tradition, one that predates the Maori and perhaps even the rise of the great Polynesian expansion itself? And if so, what might still lie beneath the soil, in unexcavated hills, or within the DNA of plants brought by the first settlers? Seeds of a forgotten world. There are the winds that roll across the steppes of Central Asia are ancient. They move with the weight of forgotten migrations, sweeping through the deserts of Xinjiang, over the Pamir Mountains, and into the highlands of Bactria. Somewhere along these shifting trails of time, the memory of a lost people lingers, faint, elusive, yet never fully erased. They were called the Yuezhi. Little survives of their own voice. No city ruins marked with their name. No known written language. And yet, their influence echoes across centuries of Asian history like a shadow just out of reach. The story begins somewhere in the grasslands of Gansu, western China. Around the 2nd millennium BC, a pastoral, possibly Indo-European people known as the Yuezhi thrived here, herding animals, trading jade, and living in the crossroads between the rising Chinese dynasties and the wild unknown to the west. Chinese records later described them as prosperous and powerful, riders of fine horses, clad in felt and fur, dwelling in mobile camps that shifted with the seasons. But in the 2nd century BC, everything changed. A powerful nomadic empire, the Xiongnu, rose in the north. The Yuezhi were defeated, their leader killed, and their skull reportedly turned into a drinking cup. The Confederation scattered, fractured by war. One group, known as the Lesser Yuezhi, fled south into Tibet and eventually vanished from the historical record. The other, the Greater Yuezhi, began a slow, epic migration across the roof of the world. But where did they go? And what did they become? The trail picks up again in Bactria, a lush, mountainous region straddling modern-day Afghanistan and Tajikistan. By the 1st century BC, the Yuezhi had conquered the remains of the Greco-Bactrian kingdom and established what would become the Kushan Empire. This powerful dynasty would go on to rule much of Central Asia and northern India for centuries, becoming a vital link along the Silk Road. Under the Kushans, cities flourished. Coinage bearing the faces of rulers like Kanishka the Great spread across empires. Buddhist art blossomed in Gandhara, blending Hellenistic styles with Indian motifs in a syncretic beauty still studied today. Sanskrit texts flourished. Greek, Bactrian, and Prakrit were spoken. And Buddhism, aided by Kushan patronage, flowed northward into Central Asia and eventually into China and Tibet. But as quickly as they rose, the Kushans fell. By the 3rd century AD, they had splintered into regional powers. Invading groups, Sassanids, Hephthalites, and later the Huns, overran their lands. The empire faded into memory, and once again, the Yuezhi vanished into the folds of history. Or did they? What makes the Yuezhi so fascinating is not just what we know, but what remains unknown. There are still unanswered questions. Where did the Yuezhi come from before they appear in Chinese records? Were they a single people, or a confederation of tribes? Their name may survive in fragments, perhaps in the Jat communities of India and Pakistan who claim descent from Central Asian tribes, or in the Tocharians, whose well-preserved mummies in the Tarim Basin have European features, woolen clothing, and links to Indo-European languages. Some scholars have suggested a connection between the Yuezhi and these early inhabitants, but it remains speculative. The mystery deepens when we consider how little archaeology has uncovered about them. Unlike the Han or the Parthians, the Yuezhi left behind few cities, no grand monuments, and almost no inscriptions in their own language. Most of what we know comes from outsiders: Chinese historians, Roman accounts, and later Buddhist texts. It's as though the Yuezhi walked through history like ghosts, present, influential, yet always one step removed from certainty. And that opens the door to a tantalizing possibility. Could some remnant of the Yuezhi still exist, hidden in the highlands of Central Asia, preserved within the cultural fabric of a forgotten valley tribe, or buried in the untranslated verses of obscure Buddhist texts? Could their legacy survive not in ruins, but in stories passed down through generations, legends of wanderers who came from the east, brought horses, trade, and the promise of peace? In the remote valleys of the Pamir Mountains, some communities still speak of distant ancestors who migrated from unknown lands, carrying sacred knowledge and strange customs. Genetic studies in the region have found markers consistent with ancient Indo-European populations, but nothing conclusive. Language, too, offers fragments. A few root words here, a grammatical echo there. But as with so much of the Yuezhi legacy, the clues remain just beyond our grasp. And then there is the land itself. Vast, uncharted, and shifting. Central Asia is a place where mountains can hide entire histories, and where the desert can preserve secrets for millennia. New discoveries, coins, tablets, frescoes, emerge every few years, each adding a new layer to the Yuezhi enigma. But the full story remains unwritten. So we are left to wonder, did the Yuezhi truly vanish, absorbed into the tides of empires and migrations? Or is their story still unfolding, hidden beneath layers of time and dust, waiting for us to look in the right place, to listen closely enough, to see the invisible footprints of a civilization that moved with the wind? And if they are still out there, buried in memory, or woven quietly into the lives of their descendants, what might they have yet to teach us about migration, resilience, and the enduring power of identity? The wind still carries their name across the steppes, but only silence answers back. As the golden sun dips below the sandstone ridges of the Negev and Sinai, the land seems to exhale, hot winds sweeping across jagged hills, casting long shadows that stretch toward the distant horizons of time. These deserts, barren and unforgiving, were once alive with movement, not with cities or monuments, but with the quiet rhythm of nomadic life. Footsteps in the dust, tents on the wind, fires flickering under a canopy of stars. Among these wanderers were the Shasu. Mentioned in Egyptian texts as early as the 15th century BC, the Shasu were described not as a unified kingdom, but as a loose confederation of semi-nomadic tribes. They roamed the borderlands of Canaan, Edom, and the southern Levant, regions straddling modern-day Jordan, Israel, and Egypt. Their name meant those who move on foot, a fitting label for a people who left few permanent traces, but whose presence was deeply felt by the great powers of the day. The Egyptians regarded the Shasu with a mixture of wariness and respect. In temple inscriptions at Karnak, pharaohs recorded military campaigns into the land of the Shasu, territories difficult to conquer, where enemies were elusive, and the terrain itself was a silent ally to those who knew it. One name, however, stands out amid the hieroglyphs. It is a designation that has stirred centuries of debate, one that hints at something far more profound. Shasu of Yhw. The phrase appears in an Egyptian text from the reign of Amenhotep III, dated to the 14th century BC. It refers to a group of Shasu dwelling in a place, or perhaps under a deity, called Yhw. The inscription reads, "The land of the Shasu of Yhw." For scholars and theologians alike, this brief mention has become a puzzle of enormous consequence. Could Yhw be an early reference to Yahweh, the deity later worshipped by the Israelites? And if so, what does this imply about the origins of Yahweh and about the mysterious people who first invoked his name? Mainstream historians tread cautiously here. While the linguistic similarity between Yhw and Yahweh is striking, it is not definitive. The Shasu of Yhw might simply have been a local tribal group with a toponym unrelated to the Israelite god. Others argue, however, that the connection is more than coincidence. They point to the geographic overlap. The territory associated with the Shasu of Yhw lies close to regions traditionally considered the cradle of early Israelite religion. Moreover, ancient Israelite culture, at least in its earliest form, shares certain traits with Shasu life: a pastoral existence, the absence of monumental architecture, and a deeply personal tribal relationship with a single, powerful deity. Could the roots of monotheism lie not in temples or scrolls, but in the oral traditions of desert tribes? Could the Shasu have carried the seeds of a religious revolution across the wilderness, one that would later flower into the foundations of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam? And what became of them? Unlike the Israelites, the Shasu left no scriptures. Unlike the Canaanites, they built no stone cities. Over time, the name itself faded from inscriptions, absorbed perhaps into other identities, the Edomites, the Midianites, or even the early Hebrews. But some traditions hold that they never truly disappeared. Bedouin oral histories still speak of ancient tribes who wandered the mountains east of the Jordan, guided by dreams and visions. In some of these tales, the sacred name of God is whispered in forms hauntingly similar to Yahweh, uttered not in liturgical ceremony, but in hushed reverence beneath the stars. Modern ethnographers working in the region have occasionally recorded fragments of lore, stories of a people who spoke to the wind and followed a divine presence, not in temples, but in silence and solitude. And there is something else. Remote areas of the Sinai and southern Jordan remain sparsely explored, their caves and canyons largely untouched. In recent years, archaeologists have uncovered petroglyphs, forgotten burial sites, and traces of ancient migration routes, unmapped corridors in which a nomadic culture might have endured unseen. Some fringe theorists suggest that remnants of the Shasu may still live on, hidden in isolated communities, their beliefs cloaked in secrecy, their stories shared only among kin. Others argue that while the people may be gone, their spiritual legacy echoes through history, far louder than the ephemeral trail of their physical existence. What we do know is this: a people once walked these lands, ungoverned by empire, guided by something older than kings. They had no palaces, no priests, no monuments. But perhaps they had something else, a whisper of the divine carried in the desert wind. Could the Shasu of Yhw represent the earliest memory of Yahweh's worship? Did they pass their faith along to another people? One whose story we know better, but whose origins remain clouded? Or could there be more, hidden among the cliffs of Edom or the valleys of Sinai, waiting for us to rediscover a forgotten lineage that changed the course of spiritual history? These questions linger in the silence of the desert. And perhaps, somewhere in its vastness, the Shasu still walk, unseen but never entirely gone. Just beyond the blue shimmer of the Bay of Bengal, veiled by thick rainforest and surrounded by warm, shallow waters, lies one of the last truly untouched corners of the modern world, the Andaman Islands. Remote, ancient, and fiercely protected by both nature and law, this archipelago is home to more than just coral reefs and tangled mangrove swamps. It is home to time itself. Deep within the forests of South and Middle Andaman, a people live without cities, without metal tools, and without the internet. The Jarawa, a name given to them by outsiders, have walked these islands for tens of thousands of years, untouched by the empires that rose and fell beyond the waves. To the modern world, they are often described as isolated or primitive. But these labels miss the point entirely. The Jarawa are not a relic of the past. They are a living people, alert, skilled, and conscious of the world that presses in around them. And yet, they remain enigmatic. Where did they come from? How long have they lived here? And how have they resisted the pull of modernity for so long? Genetic studies have traced the roots of the Jarawa people back over 50,000 years, placing them among the first humans to leave Africa and settle along the coastal routes of southern Asia. They are part of the broader Negrito population, characterized by small stature, dark skin, and tightly curled hair, who once occupied vast areas across the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia. Most of those populations have vanished or assimilated, but the Jarawa remain. They move silently through the forest, hunting wild pigs with bows crafted from jungle vines, gathering honey with the guidance of smoke and patience. They know the seasons not by a calendar, but by the flight patterns of birds and the rhythm of the sea. For generations, they have evaded full contact with outsiders, repelling intrusions with a combination of cunning and force. Attempts to civilize or assimilate them have often ended in failure or tragedy. And yet, questions persist. Who were the Jarawa before they were the Jarawa? Oral histories within the Andamanese peoples, fragmented and scarce, speak of migrations, of splinter groups, and of rival tribes. Colonial accounts from the 19th and early 20th centuries describe them as fierce defenders of their forest, but their origins remained a mystery even then. Some believe the Jarawa are direct descendants of an ancient Andamanese civilization, one that may have been larger, more widespread, and possibly even technologically complex in its own way, long before rising sea levels swallowed much of the land they once roamed. Satellite imagery has hinted at possible submerged structures along the coasts of the Andamans, linear ridges and formations inconsistent with natural erosion. Could these be remnants of lost settlements, belonging to a time when the islands were larger and drier? Others point to unexplained similarities between the Jarawa and distant cultures across the Indian Ocean. Linguists have noted curious overlaps between certain Jarawa words and fragments of Austroasiatic languages. Could this suggest contact, or even shared ancestry, with seafaring peoples far beyond the horizon? Of course, mainstream archaeology remains cautious. Much of the speculation is hindered by the limited access granted to the Jarawa territory, and rightly so. The tribe's autonomy is protected under Indian law. Direct contact is forbidden without special permission, and for good reason. Diseases as mild as the flu have devastated uncontacted groups in the past. And yet, in this inaccessibility lies part of the mystery. What knowledge is held within Jarawa oral traditions? Knowledge that outsiders have never heard. What memories do they carry of a world before modern maps, before colonizers arrived, before the islands themselves shrank beneath the rising sea? Some fringe theorists go further. They suggest that the Jarawa are the last remnants of a forgotten maritime culture, one that once stretched across the Indian Ocean, linking Madagascar, the Maldives, and even parts of Southeast Asia. They imagine hidden villages deep within the island interiors, where ancient songs are still sung in dialects unknown to the modern ear. They speak of carved stones overgrown with moss, and fire rituals passed down unchanged for millennia. Others imagine that the Jarawa, in choosing isolation, have preserved not only their bloodline, but a way of life, a worldview, and a set of spiritual beliefs that predate recorded history. And here, the line between mystery and reverence becomes thin. For to imagine that the Jarawa are lost or left behind is to misunderstand them entirely. They are not forgotten. They are hidden by choice. In a world racing forward, obsessed with progress, the Jarawa have held firm, tethered not to technology, but to memory, to land, and to the quiet wisdom of survival. Could they be descendants of a civilization we've never known? One whose markers lie beneath the jungle canopy, or perhaps just beyond the edge of our understanding? Or is the true mystery not their origin, but their endurance? How, in an age of satellites and smartphones, does a people still remain unseen? And what, if anything, do they still remember about a time before time? In the hush of the Andaman forest, there are no easy answers, only shadows, stories, and the footsteps of a people who have always walked just beyond the reach of history. Just beyond the mist-shrouded hills of Mindanao in the southern Philippines, there lies a stretch of dense, primeval rainforest, thick with bamboo, rattan, and the haunting calls of unseen birds. The air here is heavy with moisture, the canopy above blotting out the sun in patches, casting the forest floor in a shifting interplay of light and shadow. It was here, in 1971, that the world was introduced to what seemed to be a living time capsule, the Tasaday. Clad in simple garments of orchid bark and speaking a language previously unknown, the Tasaday were said to be a Stone Age tribe, untouched by modern civilization. They reportedly lived in caves, hunted with primitive tools, and had no word for war. Their discovery sent ripples through the global media, anthropology, and public imagination. Could such a people truly have remained hidden for thousands of years, isolated from the world's march of progress? At first glance, it seemed so. Photos showed wide-eyed men and women with uncalloused feet, using stone tools and gathering roots and fruits from the forest. Their language had no terms for modern objects, no word for wheel, gun, or city. Philippine officials, journalists, and anthropologists descended upon the site, eager to study a tribe that seemed to have stepped out of the Paleolithic era. The caves in which they lived were said to be cool and dry, perched high in limestone cliffs, overlooking a rainforest valley that acted as a natural barrier to intrusion. But the mystery of the Tasaday soon deepened. Almost immediately, questions began to emerge. Why had no neighboring tribal groups known of their existence? Why was their Stone Age technology so pure? Why did they lack any signs of metalworking, pottery, or long-distance trade, features present even among other so-called primitive societies. And, perhaps more curiously, why did their discovery happen under the regime of Ferdinand Marcos, at a time when the Philippine dictator was seeking international favor? By the 1980s, doubts began to take root. A Swiss journalist, Oswald Eiten, returned to the Tasaday area in 1986, following the fall of Marcos. He reported a very different picture. The caves were empty. The so-called Stone Age tribe now lived in modern clothing, in wooden huts, and some spoke local languages fluently. The original interpreter later admitted he had been told to act during the original discovery. Whispers of hoax began to circulate. Had the Tasaday been a political fabrication, an elaborate deception to draw attention, funding, or prestige? Or was the truth more complicated? Some anthropologists argue that while the Tasaday may not have been fully Stone Age, they were still distinct, an offshoot group of the nearby Chono people who had indeed been living in relative isolation. The caves were real, the cultural differences were real, but their portrayal to the world may have been overly romanticized or even manipulated by those with something to gain. And yet, the story doesn't end with the debunking, because even today, the Tasaday remain elusive. Their language, still recognized as a distinct tongue within the Philippine linguistic landscape, continues to be studied. Their territory, difficult to reach and legally protected, is rarely visited by outsiders. And some researchers maintain that elements of their lifestyle did remain uniquely isolated, even if not entirely frozen in time. This raises the deeper question: what does it mean for a civilization to be lost or hidden? Must it be ancient, monumental, or completely untouched by modernity to count? Or is it enough that it developed in quiet obscurity, preserving ways of life unfamiliar to the rest of the world? Could there still be remote communities in Southeast Asia, tribes like the Tasaday, who have slipped through the cracks of global awareness, nestled deep in jungle interiors, shielded by geography and time? Satellite imagery of the Philippine archipelago reveals a landscape still riddled with unmapped valleys, cave systems, and forest interiors where footpaths vanish beneath canopies. Regions so isolated they are accessible only by weeks of foot travel. Could it be that even now there are families, clans, entire micro-societies living beyond the reach of modern eyes? And beyond the Philippines, what of the broader Pacific? The archipelagos of Indonesia, Papua, and Melanesia harbor thousands of islands, many still thinly surveyed. If the Tasaday, however briefly, emerged from the shadows of obscurity, might others still remain there, undisturbed? The Tasaday remind us that history is not always as linear as we imagine. Sometimes it loops, stutters, or hides behind layers of assumption and narrative. Were they a hoax? A misunderstood offshoot? A manipulated discovery? Or perhaps something more fragile and nuanced? A genuine echo of a simpler time, briefly illuminated and then retreated once again into mystery? In the end, the story of the Tasaday leaves us not with answers, but with the feeling that somewhere, out there in the folds of the forest, there may still be people who live by rhythms older than the world we know. People whose footsteps never touch concrete, whose nights are guided by firelight, and whose stories are told only among the trees. And so we are left to wonder, what else waits, quietly, patiently, just beyond the edge of our understanding? As the southernmost windswept tip of the Americas reaches toward Antarctica, the world seems to dissolve into sea spray, cold silence, and the ever-shifting light of a gray sky. Here, among the jagged coasts and remote channels of Tierra del Fuego, ice-kissed waters wrap around labyrinthine fjords. The land feels more forgotten than forsaken, a place beyond history where time slows and the landscape seems to breathe with ancient memory. And it is here, in this frozen solitude, that whispers of a people still echo. The Yaghan. Also known as the Yámana, the Yaghan people once thrived in the archipelagos of southern Patagonia, particularly the region between the Beagle Channel and Cape Horn. For thousands of years, they navigated these frigid straits in canoes made from tree bark, surviving in one of the planet's most inhospitable environments without the use of fireproof clothing, houses, or even shoes. They wore the cold like a second skin. Early European explorers, including Charles Darwin, were baffled by the Yaghan. How could a people endure such extremes with so little? And why had they remained so unknown, so utterly isolated from the greater arcs of South American history? The Yaghan weren't builders of great cities, nor were they known for writing or metallurgy. Their legacy was one of adaptation, of survival at the edge of the world. They spoke a language with complex grammar and vocabulary that could articulate nuanced ideas of space, movement, and emotion. In fact, the word mamihla pinatapai, which comes from the Yaghan language, is often cited as one of the hardest to translate, a shared glance between two people, each wishing the other would initiate something they both desire but are hesitant to begin. This poetic subtlety stands in stark contrast to the harshness of their environment, and perhaps it's this tension that makes the Yaghan so mysterious. By the 20th century, most anthropologists considered the Yaghan a vanishing culture, dwindled by disease, colonization, and assimilation. The last full-blooded Yaghan woman, Cristina Calderón, passed away in 2022. With her, the language, once carried only by oral tradition, seemed to fade into silence. But even in death, the Yaghan defy closure. For one, oral histories among the surviving mixed heritage communities speak of clans that left before the missionaries arrived, those who vanished deeper into the channels, far beyond even the most remote settlements. Could isolated groups still survive in those uncharted labyrinths of fjords and islands, hidden by the impenetrable weather and nearly impossible terrain? It's not as implausible as it sounds. The Fuegian archipelago is a place of secrets. There are islands that have never been surveyed, and channels where satellite signals falter. Expeditions still report unrecorded flora and unfamiliar animal behaviors. In such places, human footprints could be swallowed whole by moss and snow within a day. And there are hints, fragments, that suggest not all has been lost. In 2004, researchers conducting a remote environmental survey found the remnants of what appeared to be a Yaghan-style canoe, partially submerged in a hidden cove. No modern village was nearby, and the structure was too intact, too deliberately placed to be a forgotten artifact. Who had built it? When? Local fishermen have spoken in hushed tones about strange fires seen flickering at night on distant shores, far from any known habitation, faint smoke columns where no trails lead. Even cryptic artifacts, woven baskets, stone tools, have surfaced from caves and beaches with no explanation as to who left them or when. Could some thread of the Yaghan still survive in these isolated pockets? If not in blood, then perhaps in memory, in secret descendants who continue the rituals, language, or songs beneath the radar of the modern world? There are scholars who dismiss such ideas as romanticism, a projection of our own yearning for mystery. And yet, history has shown us time and again that disappearance is rarely absolute. The assumption of extinction has often masked mere retreat. The Yaghan way of life was never about visibility. It was about merging with the rhythms of land and sea, of adapting so completely to the environment that the boundary between people and place dissolves. To live like that is to leave little behind, but also, perhaps, to remain unseen by design. And so we are left with questions. Is it possible that in some fog-veiled inlet of Tierra del Fuego, A fire still burns for warmth alone, not tourism or history. That a child still listens to an elder recite stories in a language shaped by wind and water. That perhaps, in the coldest corners of the earth, a sliver of the Yaghan's spirit survives, not frozen in time, but still evolving, still hiding, still out there. If so, then maybe the Yaghan did not disappear at all. Maybe they simply returned to the silence that shaped them, waiting, watching, and reminding us that some civilizations, like the winds of the south, are not lost, only out of reach. The wind moves gently across the golden grasslands of northern Tanzania, whispering through acacia trees and stirring the dust of an ancient land. At sunrise, the great Rift Valley shimmers with quiet majesty, its cliffs and escarpments holding the secrets of time. Beneath its open skies, in the shadows of Lake Eyasi's glinting waters, the land feels timeless, unchanged. And here, on this stretch of earth where early humans once took their first steps, lives a people who may never have truly left that ancient rhythm. The Hadza. Neither empire nor kingdom, the Hadza are something perhaps more elusive, a living echo of humanity's forgotten origins. They are among the last full-time hunter-gatherers on Earth, and possibly the closest surviving mirror to the way our ancestors lived tens of thousands of years ago. But who are they really? And how have they remained? So quietly, so completely, apart from the vast sweep of modern civilization. To walk alongside the Hadza is to step out of time. There are no written texts, no centralized leadership, no permanent dwellings. They do not plant crops, herd animals, or store food beyond a few days. Each morning, they rise with the sun and follow the scent of the hunt, tracking baboons through thorn thickets or plucking tubers from beneath dry soil. Their bows are strung with giraffe tendons, their arrows tipped with poison. Their lives follow the rhythm of wind and rainfall, of fruiting trees and migrating game. Linguists have long puzzled over the Hadza language, which features clicks and glottal stops similar to the Khoisan languages of southern Africa, but is otherwise unrelated to any known tongue. It is an isolate, a linguistic island, in a sea of change. And that's where the mystery deepens. Because the Hadza are not simply a small tribe resisting assimilation. They are an enigma of continuity. Genetic studies suggest their lineage may stretch back tens of thousands of years, perhaps as far as 50,000 years, making them one of the oldest continuous populations on Earth. Yet no one knows exactly where they came from. Unlike neighboring groups, the Hadza do not tell stories of conquest or migration. They believe they have always been here. According to their oral traditions, they emerged from the land itself, as if the volcanic soil and lakebed reeds had breathed them into being. Archaeological evidence supports a surprising degree of continuity. Stone tools found in the Lake Eyasi region match those used by the Hadza today, with some dating back as far as the Middle Stone Age. Is it possible that the Hadza are not merely preserving a lifestyle, but embodying an entire way of being that stretches back to the dawn of humankind? And if so, what might they know that we've forgotten? Anthropologists have long studied the Hadza for insights into early human cognition, diet, and cooperation. But there is something else, something harder to quantify, a sense that they exist in the space between what was and what might still be. Unlike modern societies that move forward by accumulating complexity, the Hadza remain grounded in simplicity, not primitiveness, but presence. Yet their survival is not without its peculiarities. Satellite images have revealed traces of forest paths and stone circles deeper in the Yhw Valley, far from known Hadza campsites. Were these ancient Hadza settlements, or remnants of a sister culture that once shared the valley and vanished into legend? Even stranger are tales told among local pastoralists of people who vanish into the trees, who appear barefoot and silent, moving like shadows through the brush, speaking no known language. Are these exaggerations born from myth? Or have some Hadza bands withdrawn so completely into the wilderness that they remain uncounted, unknown, untouched? In a world so thoroughly mapped and digitized, could entire clans still live off-grid, untracked by census or satellite, their fires hidden beneath the branches of sacred fig trees? Some speculate that the Hadza's unique resistance to agriculture and permanent settlement isn't just cultural, it's philosophical. That they've chosen a different path. One where ownership is meaningless, hierarchy is absent, and nature is not something to be conquered, but lived with. If that is true, then perhaps the Hadza are more than a tribe. They are a quiet rebellion against the trajectory of civilization itself. And yet even that idea might be too neat. Because to frame the Hadza as relics is to misunderstand them. They are not fossils. They are living, changing, choosing. Some young Hadza men now wear watches or travel to town. Others return to the bush, shrugging off modernity like a skin that doesn't quite fit. Their flexibility, paradoxically, is what has allowed them to endure. Still, the future remains uncertain. Encroaching farmland, climate disruption, and political pressure weigh heavily on their shrinking lands. And as anthropologists, governments, and tourists take greater interest, the Hadza face a quiet erosion, less visible than conquest, but no less real. So we are left to ask, are we witnessing the last breath of an ancient civilization, or merely a surface glimpse of something deeper, more enduring, hidden just out of reach? Could it be that in the heart of Tanzania, beneath the trees where humans first learned to stand and speak and dream, there walks a people who never stopped listening to the land? And if so, what might they still remember that the rest of us have forgotten?